Welcome, everyone, to Davos Fingers, episode 142, Tarbean. I'm Scatty, and with me, as always, is my buddy, Matt.
Greetings, everybody. So good to chat with you, Scatty. Our fourth episode covering The Name of the Wind, which is the first book, of course, in the Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. Guys, we're going to get a little dark today. This is not a great time for our little Kvothe. We are covering in this episode, chapter 18, Roads to Safe Places, through chapter 25, which is called Eager for Reasons. If you want to check out the first 17 chapters, go back and check out our previous coverage and stick with us for more. But those ones are going to be good.
Yeah, having a blast so far, but this one's heavy.
Blake.
I mean, the last one was heavy. You know, we lost Kvothe's family in a dark turn, and this one just gets heavier.
We're going to wallow in that darkness for a little bit. We're going to wallow in the trauma. We're going to just swim in it.
The good news is, you know, no spoilers, but like, I think most of the real dark trauma will get covered in this episode, so we won't wallow for too long.
Okay.
All right. Well, a few announcements maybe before we jump in. Matt and I are lucky enough to join fandom artist Sanrixian on her Samurai Scribbles program. That's tomorrow for us, but for you guys, it will have been like, you know, like last
week and a half ago or something.
I don't know. Hope you enjoyed.
Actually, a week ago.
Hope we do and did good. And you can check that out at twitch.tv/Sanrixian to get more information on how you can watch those. A lot of fun. She just draws and talks, and it's a good time.
And we talk too.
And we talk, yes.
Which is what we do. We're just going to sit there actually and watch her.
Yeah, I mean,
I've done that before. You
yes,
kind of forget to talk sometimes because
yes.
you're just like,
huh.
She's so good at what she does.
She drew us as Jay and Bob once.
I gotta get that. Do we have that somewhere?
No, I don't think we do. I think on a Discord she mentioned she would look for it, but I don't think she knows maybe where it is. The Mark Doors monkey one is the one that I always remember.
Right.
With the little monkey in a little armor suit.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful times. Okay. Song of Madness ended.
We finished our yearly tournament, Song of Madness, where we pit a Song of Ice and Fire characters against each other to the death in a series of Twitter polls. This year, fans got behind their champion and willed her to victory. Looking back, it feels like it was pretty apparent. I mean, it felt like the writing was on the wall. That Sansa Stark would be our 2023 champion. And sure enough, she rode the wave all the way to victory, man.
Yeah. It's been too long now. It's been a few weeks and I've forgotten the numbers, but she didn't really have a close match at all. She defeated everyone pretty easily. And yeah, it did feel it felt like her year in a lot of ways. And
yeah. Well, just like the talk around her and everything, it's just people were really supportive and really wanted her to take it this year. And
yeah,
good for her. It was great.
Yeah, good for her. It was a good, fun tournament.
Good for this fictional character.
Good for this fictional character. You done good.
You did good, kid.
We introduced some other fictional characters this year, which didn't go maybe quite as well as we hoped.
We knew they'd lose, but they all got pretty creamed pretty bad. I thought guys like Indiana Jones, Princess Leia, some of them would do pretty well. They did not.
No, they didn't. And we could have gone maybe for some slightly bigger names, but we chose some big ones. Indiana Jones is a big name.
Yeah.
Leia's a big name.
Yeah.
But, we could have gone with Batman or Vader or something maybe, but I think that it still got greened, to be honest.
I do too.
Feels that way.
Yep. Well, we wanted to have fun this year, and we did. So
We did indeed. Yeah. It was a lighter lighter feeling this year, I think, than other years. Right. And that's good. Sorry, you can tell I'm a little distracted. I'm fixing my mic so we don't have a repeat of that one time where my mic was behind my monitor. It's all
you
good
were
now.
and you were so scared.
It worked out okay.
That's
Fixed.
okay. I'm checking hockey scores just while we're sitting here. So
okay.
Avalanche are playing tonight.
Oh, are they?
They are.
Got NBA playoffs have started too. I don't really watch them anymore. Used to be a thing for me, but
where will you be next week, Scad?
Yeah, next week I'm gonna be at Ice and Fire Con, and I'm really excited. It's if you listen to the podcast and you don't know what Ice and Fire Con is, I'm a little surprised because we talk about it quite a bit. But Ice and Fire Con is a convention for fans of A Song of Ice and Fire, which we are not covering today. So maybe we've gotten some new listeners that have just been listening to our Kingkiller content. But anyway,
should check it out. They're like, what does Davos Fingers have to do with Kingkiller Chronicle?
Yeah.
Who's Davos?
Who's Davos? Is he in book 3? Do they have insider information?
Their names are Matt and Scad, not Davos.
So anyway, yeah, I'll be at Ice and Fire Con next week. Going to be a great year as always, I'm sure. Lots of things on the docket. I'm taking it much easier this year. No panels, no fandom fave thing, no performance contest. It's going to be, I'm going to focus on the biscuits and gravy this year for sure, and chatting with friends. And so this will release while I'm there, actually, to patrons, and it will release when I'm flying home for non-patrons. So if you're a patron and you happen to listen to this for some reason while you're at Ice and Fire Con, grab me. Let's have a chat.
You could have a listening party. That wouldn't be awkward at all.
Yeesh.
Wouldn't that be so weird? I can think of a few things that would make me more uncomfortable than being like, hey, let's listen to my podcast together.
Yeah. I remember. Do you remember when Rock Band, the game, was huge?
Yeah, I love that.
I loved Rock Band too. But I remember I was at it wasn't a party, it was like a gathering with, one of my best friends, and he had it. And I really liked, being the singer in rock. I'm not a very good singer, but I really liked doing it. And anyway, everybody's been drinking. It's really late at night. I don't want to stop playing. And I'm like, come on, let's keep playing. Everybody's upstairs away from Rock Band. And I'm like, I want to keep playing. One guy's like, I'll go down there and watch you, and it's gonna be really terrible for both of us. Or something. It was awesome because it really is. It's like that's not a good exercise for anybody to just watch somebody sing. That is in some basement somewhere. Yeah, it was awesome.
You're like,
I'm sure.
Some space.
Yeah, I think it was Run to the Hills. Probably that was my jam for a while. Good times.
That saint.
It's not often we get a new story on the Davos Fingers podcast, one we haven't told through the already 141 episodes.
Oh my goodness.
But I don't think I've shared that one before.
Nope, never heard you talk about your guilting someone into watching you play Rock Band.
I'm a terrible human. That's all there is to it.
It's not being terrible, but I don't know, man.
All right, let's get into it. We are spoiler free for Kingkiller Chronicle until the end of the podcast for a special segment that we call Devi After Dark. So that means we're not going to spoil anything beyond the content we're covering in this episode until that last section there. So don't worry, we'll warn you when that's coming so you can jump off if you are reading the series for the first time and don't want to be spoiled. And you can just turn it off and join us next time.
Absolutely. And we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us. Tell us things that we missed. Correct us on things. Tell us what you liked if you liked something. Tell us to tell less stories. We probably won't, but you can ask us to. That's fine. You can find us at davosfingers.com. We are davosfingers@gmail.com. Facebook, at davosfingers on Twitter. And you can learn more about our Patreon program at patreon.com/davosfingers.
That's right. Let's dive into it, Matt.
Shall we go to chapter 18?
Roads to safe places. Yeah, we'll see about that.
Yeah. Okay. So roads to safe places. Okay. Let's do it. First of all, I do like that Rothfuss names his chapters. It's kind of fun. Not something I'm used to. So
not after living in A Song of Ice and Fire for a decade.
I guess George names his as well. Sansa.
Yes.
Samuel.
The
Soiled Knight.
Soiled Knight. We picked the same one.
Whoopee pants. Okay. Chapter 18, Roads to Safe Places. This chapter starts with Kvothe giving us a quick lesson on how to cope with pain. There exists 4 doors of the mind through which we may enter according to the level of pain and our need in the moment. The first door is sleep. The second is forgetting. The third is madness. And the fourth is death. So Kvothe's mind, in the immediate aftermath of the Chandrian slaughter of his family and friends, enters that first door. He wanders deep into the forest with what he's got on his back, and he sleeps. The sleeping leads to the second door, forgetting. Not completely, but enough to cast the most painful memories into a dark corner of his mind and numb the pain until an as yet not to be expected time for healing. Dreams accompany the sleep. He dreams of Lacklith, a woodsman who years ago had traveled with Kvothe's troop. The dream doubles as a memory, as he recalls Lacklith teaching him what plants, roots, and berries can be beneficial and which are harmful. He teaches him how to move silently through the brush and how to set snares that will kill and snares that won't kill. Then the transition is sudden, as is so often in dreams, and as he finds himself in Ben's wagon, learning about tying knots. Then, in this dream, he's with his father, who's tuning his lute and preparing to play the song they'd waited so long to hear. As Dad starts to teach him about waystones of all things, his voice transitions back to Ben, teaching him that waystones mark old roads, sometimes leading to safe destinations, but sometimes to dangerous ones too. Kvothe finds himself then amongst a swatch of these stones. Swath, I think, is what I meant to say, but I said swatch. He finds himself amongst a swath of these stones, just a ton of them, as he reaches to touch the shadow beneath 3 that had been set up as an arch. He wakes up and realizes his mind had just taken him through a veritable Boy Scouts course and covered over his pain a bit in the process. With that focus, a focus on survival, he sets out to keep himself alive. He finds water. He lays a snare for some food. He finds the right kind of sap to soothe his bloody and torn fingers. If you remember from our last episode, he sat and played his father's lute until his fingers bled. And he finds a gray stone next to a small pond, which can act as a wind-breaking shelter. And he falls again into a deep sleep. The next morning, he finds his snare successful, a live rabbit just waiting to be dressed and eaten. But just the thought of blood again on his hands is too much for Kvothe, and he lets the prey go, despite the gnawing hunger he's feeling. The regret, heightened by that pinched stomach, immediately presents itself, and he sets another snare to try again. He'll get there. And that's where our chapter ends.
Yeah, he'll get there. He'll get there.
Maybe.
No, I think you will. I think it's a hard thing probably to experience that visceral event that he went through with his parents, and then to then take a life of any kind, right? Probably is
Sure.
just not where his brain wants to be.
Right, yeah.
At least to get some distance from it.
Right.
But how about that dream? Just like I feel like maybe this is the most effective example I've ever seen of someone dealing with grief. Like, he falls asleep, he forgets about it after like one sleep session, and all the memories are replaced with just the memories that will help him survive.
That he just needs, things he probably hasn't thought about in a long time. Do you think that comes from his training with Ben in sympathy and learning to access part of his mind and segment things.
Yeah.
Remember, he learned a mental exercise called Heart of Stone, which allows you to kind of put aside grief and think logically. Now that had always been something that was very proactive on his part to like access that, but you have to wonder if maybe he'd done it enough times that almost his subconscious was practicing the Heart of Stone to be able to get him going and get him moving.
And the other part of that same chapter, I think, where he just talks about hide the stone, right? Where he's creating all these different rooms, and there's literally two parts of his brain playing this game against each other and keeping information. I wonder if he's kind of. It's interesting that Rothfuss doesn't go into this, right? Because he could have said, "I used that training to set this all right to set all this aside." I used the Alar to bury those memories with a different part of my personality, with a different person, and I bifurcated my mind, right? He doesn't say they did that, but it feels that way. It's so he puts it away so effectively. I mean, certainly there are people that deal with grief, in this way by kind of burying it for a time, but I feel it feels way more effective the way it's being described here from Kvothe than I've ever heard.
Absolutely,
and it might just be some of his natural ability too. Like he's just got that perfect brain that can remember all these things Lackcliffe told him.
He is
like,
a different.
The rest
kid,
of us are like,
sure.
I don't know. We talked about some berries a while, but because his brain is so sharp, which also comes from the training, but just from him being special too.
Yeah, I think so.
Allows this to work for him. Go ahead. Sorry,
I think so.
You.
No, you didn't at all. The point of the game, I think I forgot what I was going to say. I'm a podcast host. I do podcasts and then I forget what I'm going to say. No, but you have to think that it makes sense that that he wouldn't be connecting the dots if he was using some of these sympathetic abilities subconsciously. His mind, he wouldn't be thinking, "Oh, I'm using Heart of Stone right now." He's so burdened by the grief and the exhaustion and the hunger that it may not even enter his mind that I'm using Heart of Stone. It just kind of happen. Yeah. And I wonder if that's what's going on. He said about Heart of Stone, Ben said this, a man who truly mastered Heart of Stone could go to his sister's funeral without ever shedding a tear. And certainly he is feeling grief. It's there and you see it. But he's able, like you said, to compartmentalize, seek the stone a little bit and put it into a room whose door he can shut and focus on what he needs to do to survive.
Yeah, and he's for sure in denial. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, her book On Death and Dying, which is something I read in college and was a major part of some coursework I did. She talks about the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And trying to put Kvothe in one of these boxes, I feel like it's just denial. He's not dealing with anger or bar. He might get to some of these things later. It's hard for me to remember exactly, but it feels. She talks in that book. She talks about how it's rarely you're just marching through them. Anger, okay, denial, anger, bargaining. I'm getting through them. I'm done, and I get to acceptance. Usually, it's very cyclical, right? Your denial, then some anger, then some bargaining, then back to denial, and you're kind of going around and around all the time. It's really early in Kvothe's grief journey here, but it feels to me like just pushing away these memories like that, separating his brain, like you've been saying, is really just not processing them at all and dealing with denial.
Absolutely. And we'll see that later in the later chapters.
And for how long it seems like he does it.
Yeah. One of the themes is of this block of chapters that we're reading is his refusal to let people help him. I'm going to point them out as we go through them. You probably will too. There's a lot of who I call in my notes heroes that come up for Kvothe in these chapters. And he ends up refusing the help that they freely offer him. And, this one we see kind of an indirect one in him. He gets a rabbit and he lets it go because he doesn't want to remember. And that's a big part of his refusing to help throughout this block of chapters, is he just doesn't want to remember. He wants to keep those memories locked in that back room of his mind. And he certainly does that here with the rabbit, I think.
Yeah. We'll talk a lot more about that too, because I think in a lot of those ways he thinks, well, yeah, we'll get to it. So Kvothe finds this graystone, right, that he uses as a windbreak. And again, because he's separated his mind like this, he doesn't associate it with his life at all. He just thinks of it as a windbreak and not a greystone or a waystone. But waystones, we learn, are like magnetic, right? They can they have a magnetic property to them, and it's almost like Kvothe was drawn to it, right?
Yeah.
And it's because they're special to his people, P.T. Maru.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that he ended up on one.
Yeah, and he does have some iron on him, some cheap iron, but some iron.
Cheap iron, yes,
so
correct.
I don't know if that helped at all.
Yeah,
but,
I know. Yeah.
Right.
And that shelter that he uses the greystone for, I've made a note. He doesn't say it's for him. He wants to make a shelter for his lute.
Right.
It's not for him. It's for his lute.
Mm-hmm.
Which, he's very attached to this lute, and it's funny because, and the book too, the book from Aventhy, all of this talk about leaving these things behind and forgetting them and not dealing with them and not processing them, but these two things are very important to him, and he's maintaining a very active connection with them. It's weird that he can do that and still not have those memories flood back, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. Put a pin in that. I want to talk about that in the next chapter.
Okay, cool.
About fingers and strings. Yeah. Because I agree with you. It's interesting, the dual role, competing role that lute plays for him. Yeah.
Yes.
And the book too. I didn't factor the book in. So good point. But the lute especially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the lute's way more important at this part of the book, at least, for sure.
Right. And I think the lute is connected a little bit, and I use this word maybe a little bit unfairly. One of the things we talk a lot about, those 4 doors, and you get a lot of the sleep, you get a lot of forgetting. Obviously, death's not going to come into this. Kvothe isn't dying. But the insanity, the 3rd door, isn't one that's talked about very often. But this is where you get little glimpses of, not like insane asylum, Gotham asylum styles insanity, but a little bit of just, not being in your right state of mind to the point that you are convincing yourself that you need to make a shelter for a lute. And it's almost like your mind is going to that illogical, I won't say insane, because it doesn't feel like insanity. I think of the Joker when I think of insane, but this less than logical way of thinking to cover up what you really need in that moment.
No, yeah, you're right. It feels like a door beyond the forgetting door, but not quite in the madness door.
Right. Yeah.
Like in the let's warp reality to something more comfortable door. Mm-hmm. Right? Because he's not insane, but he's clearly not making the best choices all the time. Partially maybe because he doesn't want to remember things. He talks later in one of these chapters about partially because he thinks maybe he deserves to be punished. Which is, kind of a crazy thing to be thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Yep. I wish I would have had this Ladich guy back in my day.
The woodsman guy,
little scoutmaster. Yeah, Lackleth. That's his name. Yep.
Yeah, he sounds great. Yeah.
He's like the Ron Swanson of Kvothe's past. This guy's great.
Here's your permit.
Yeah.
You find berries in the woods.
I'm watching Parks with my kids right now, and
are you?
My oldest Luke is loving Ron Swanson. Just worships the guy.
Yeah.
We just watched the episode of Give Me All the Eggs and Bacon You Have.
Yes.
No, I don't think you heard me correctly.
I want to make sure you heard me. What I think you heard is bring me lots of eggs and bacon.
What I mean is bring me all the eggs and bacon you have.
My kids are asking to watch The Office and Friends too. And I'm like, Friend, you're not ready for Friends.
Yeah.
But The Office, maybe. I'm like, mainly, I'm like, you won't get it.
Yeah, some of this we've watched The Office, and Chewy watched it, who's between the ages of your kids.
Yeah.
He's like right in the middle of them. And there's plenty he didn't get, but there's plenty that's still pretty funny for him. So if you feel good about it, especially in the later seasons where it gets into some more serious themes like Jim and Pam's marriage and everything.
Marriage stuff.
That stuff gets a little heavy. But yeah.
If you didn't know, this is the Office podcast.
Yes.
It's Parks and Rec thrown in.
We are talking about Parks and Rec and The Office, interrupting ourselves talking about the Kingkiller Chronicle, even though at its heart, this isn't a Song of Ice and Fire podcast. So figure that out, listeners. We're talking about insanity today. Figure that one out. Yeah.
And we fit, apparently. I don't have a ton more in this chapter. I do have one thing in that memory that I thought was interesting. Ben's talking to him about knots. And he says, knots are interesting things. They can be the strongest or weakest part of the rope. And I think it's an interesting line. He comes out of that dream and says, Ben never taught me about knots.
I never learned about knots from Ben.
So what we have almost exclusively in that dream sequence is stuff that's happened to him that he's remembering. And then we have this weird stuff that with Ben that didn't really ever happen.
Right. And obviously his dad never played them the song. I guess he never did in the dream either. He was just getting ready to.
He was teasing it.
But right.
Although imminently teasing. It seems like he was gonna before the dream stopped.
Right.
Yeah. But your dreams do that sometimes, right? Like you're gonna do something and then your dream somehow finds a way to stop the dream because you don't know what the painting looks like or what the person like, you know what I mean? So your dream stops it and finds a way
usually at the worst time, right, Scad? Usually right when you're about there.
I don't know if
are we talking about the same thing? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I don't know.
What are you talking about?
I don't know. The way you phrased that made me think that you went a little dirtier than I intended.
I'm talking about tying knots. I don't know what you're talking about.
All right.
But
tying knots. I think you were talking about what happens after you tie the knot, maybe.
In my religion, yep.
Anyway, we'll talk maybe more about that in Debbie After Dark, but it's just interesting that it's something that didn't happen to him and never happened. That conversation never happened. But I wonder if it means something.
I think it must. Shall we go to Fingers and Strings?
We can. Fingers and Strings. Here we go.
Okay.
Kvothe quickly used his remembered knowledge to organize a little living space. He had a fire pit, a place to sleep, a shelter for his loot, and even some backup food in case of emergency. In 4 days, he had built this for himself amidst all his trauma. But aside from these basic survival acts, all Kvothe really did was play his lute. He played every song he could remember, and he played those that he had forgotten. Then he started writing his own songs with his own lyrics. And after that, he got experimental, playing things that he saw. He spent 3 days capturing wind turning a leaf. I'm doing quotes for those listening to the podcast and not watching on YouTube. He got good at capturing what he saw with music. Then in the 3rd month, he looked inward and started playing music about his memories. Watching Shandy dance, riding in the wagon with Ben, mother smiling. Playing these things hurt, and he hoped he would callous soon. Then a string broke, and Kvothe just sat there dumbly, unsure what to do. Lute playing was about all he had. When he finally admitted to himself that he could no more make a new suitable string than buy one, there was only one thing left to do. He learned to play the lute with 6 strings. Took him 11 days. 11 days, Matt. Then another string broke, and he wasted no time this time trying to replace strings or anything. He just stripped it off and learned to play with 5 strings. Then a 3rd string broke. It was too much. Couldn't play with 4 strings. He packed his things and he started to walk. He went south, looking for a road to a town, a bigger town, as farmers have no need for lute strings, and that's all he was after. His wagon track found a bigger road, then that a bigger one, and soon he was on a road that had lots of traffic. At first, he hid from the people, but then he realized that if he kept to himself, he would be largely ignored. That is until a man and his son encouraged Kvothe to ride in the back of their wagon. He was hesitant, but it was easier to get in than argue. And his feet, they did hurt. So he did. Seth was the man's name, and he shared bread with Kvothe, and his son Jake joined him in a verse of Tinker Tanner. That old rollicking.
Great tune. Great tune.
The kindness of the ordeal and the memory of other wagons and other songs made Kvothe's chest ache. And that's the end of this chapter.
Yeah. A little bit of what we're terming insanity popping up again. And I need to go to a town just to get lute strings, right?
Yeah.
Does he need to go to a town? Absolutely. The seasons are a-changing. He needs to return to civilization at some point. But the reason that he's put into his mind for doing it is a little bit off.
It's a little wonky. It's a little wonky. And what he thinks he's gonna do when he gets there without money to buy lute strings, I don't know.
What do you do now?
Yeah. But it is interesting because it's still that middle ground that you wanted to come back to of he's buried these memories, but he knows the lute's important. He's singing songs about his mother and his family life, but he's buried the feelings. It's a very weird, maybe this is part of that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and cycling through some of those grief stages. I don't know.
It's a super weird balancing act. It's his only solace. Playing the lute is his only solace right now. It's the only thing preserving his ability to forget. It's his thing that's keeping those memories at bay, I feel like. At the same time, he's bathing in the memories. With every song that he plays, that's a memory for him. So playing these things hurt, he says. I love this line. Playing these things hurt, but it was a hurt like tender fingers on lute strings. I bled a bit and hoped that I would callous soon. Isn't that why we do art, right? I know that's a really beautiful way of saying that. That's why we do art. It's why we write music. Man. It's why we write, man. A lot of the times it's to deal with pain. Yeah. And we hope that by addressing it head on, it will be therapeutic for you and maybe therapeutic for others too.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question for you on that, being a musician, Matt. I just, as I was thinking about this, I was like, what is it? I mean, I guess the question on its surface is, what is it like to just invent music on the spot? Like, I originally thought that playing warm grass and cool breeze was really vague and hard to fathom. Like, how would you even go about something like that? Then I started thinking about it. I'm wondering, I'm like, well, isn't that always just kind of what making music is? Trying to match up sound with feelings and events.
Yeah.
So like, does it just kind of, I know it seems like such a basic question, but like, does it just kind of come to you and you're like, yeah, that feels like this.
This feels right. Yeah. It totally is. And people do it in different ways. I just finished a song that I really love. I'll have to send it to you, Scatty.
Yeah.
Listener Scat is he's very gracious about listening to my music.
It's easy when the music's good.
Listen to this song, Scott, and tell me you like it, or my confidence will be ruined forever. But
I'm not always the kindest. I gave you some feedback once that you graciously accepted, but I felt like maybe it wasn't the best.
No, I don't even recall specifically what that was. So it was. We'll leave it. I received it well. All of your feedback has felt helpful.
Okay.
But like, it's weird how the feeling hits you when it's like, it's not so much like that's right. For me, it's more of, that's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to do. So like with this one that I just finished, I had the music written for a long time and I was really excited about it. I really loved the way that the music felt and I kept singing stuff over it and nothing had ever felt right. But the way that the music sounded, I knew like this was going to be the one that I reached deep into my heart to write something about, but I didn't know what was down there. And funnily enough, laying bare my feelings here, Khalasar, it came after a little argument with my wife. And, we've been married over 15 years now, and we've learned to argue quite well. like productive arguing, right? So it wasn't like screaming and yelling at each other, nothing like that. But it was a warm disagreement, I'll call it. Not quite heated, but not quite passive. It was a warm disagreement, enough that I felt like I needed to get some space after. So where I get my space is right here in this room where I am, with these things right here. And I picked up my guitar and I wrote the first 2 verses of that song like that. It just poured out of me. I had the first 2 verses written in 10 minutes or less, right? And it's just that feeling when it hits you, you're like, oh, that's it. That's what I wanted to say, right? And it's not an angry song or anything. I feel like it's a quite lovely sentiment, but it for me, it's less about, oh, that's the sound of wind blowing leaves or whatever. It's like, no, that's what I wanted to say all along. I just needed to find it, and I wonder if that's what Kvothe was searching for too. It was just that right feeling, if that makes any sense.
It does, but it makes me wonder if he actually wasn't trying to write warm grass and cool breeze or whatever these things are. He was making music about his feelings, and noticed the things happening around him, and instead of naming the feelings and making them real, he named them the things he was seeing
that was happening. The visual associated with some sort of memory, right? I think so, man. I like that. I like that.
Well, I didn't think about it until you just told your story, so thank you for leading me there.
It's an interesting, it's so cool that it made me think the guy who does that best for me is actually my favorite artist of all time, but one who I don't always talk about is Dave Matthews. Dave Matthews is so good about connecting, just like transmitting a feeling through song, right? He'll say these really weird things, right? Like he's got a song called Crush. And in the song, he's talking about, you crush me with the things you do, and using all these weird metaphors, crash into me. Pretty violent stuff. This is what this guy writes about sometimes. But yet,
that song's about sex though, right?
You betcha. Crush kind of is too. But the thing is the way that he sings those lyrics and the music behind it and everything, you feel that emotion, right? Even though the words are kind of weird and different, you feel what he's trying to say. And so he's very good at connecting emotions to words through music. It's one thing I love about him. It's a little difficult to explain, but
I remember I had a friend, probably isn't quite right. We were friendly. We were acquaintances, played high school soccer together. His name was Pat Jass. And he used to try to convince me that vocals were just another instrument to convey emotion, and the lyrics didn't matter. And I was like, dude, we were high school seniors. I'm like, dude, you're insane.
I see that.
Stop, just stop. Come on. Put down your self-importance and just listen to music like the rest of us do. But I think that's partially a little bit what you're saying.
It can be.
Like
it can be
expressing that emotion through your voice without the words even matching sometimes, right?
Yeah. You hear Dave Matthews saying, you read the words on a page and he says, you crush me with the things you do. And it's like, that's kind of weird. But then you hear him sing it. And he's like, you crush me with the things you do, with the music behind it. And you're just like, oh, I feel that, Dave. I know exactly what you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about, brother. So it can be when done right. But also I'm a big lyric guy too. So I don't quite agree with Pat, because I'm big on how
you're big on the storytelling
component.
Yeah. You can see that in the songs you've written. At least I think you can.
Thanks.
How often do strings break?
Not that often for me.
I mean,
it probably depends on
if you're playing 8 hours a day, I guess.
Yeah, you're probably breaking a few more strings. Yeah. But it sucks when a string breaks, and trying to play without that string there feels like when you're missing a tooth, Yeah. And it sucks. So I feel bad for him.
I don't know why, but I was reminded of, I really don't know why, but I was reminded of There's Something About Mary. Have you seen that movie?
Oh my gosh, it's been years since I've seen something about Mary. Wow.
But he picks up the hitchhiker, and the guy's got a master plan for 7-minute abs. And then he's like, yeah, well, what happens if somebody comes out with 6-minute abs? And the guy just like freaks out and loses it. Nobody works out in 6 minutes. When he broke the string, he couldn't play with 4. I don't know why, but that's where my brain went. Nobody plays with 4 strings.
That's the stop.
Nobody does that.
Come on, Kvothe. At that point, it's just a bass guitar. So you can do it. I thought he shouldn't have given up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd turn it into a bass, buddy. You got 4 strings. You'll be fine.
It's foreign enough to me, like how that all works, that I thought it would be impossible to even do it with 6. Like you're missing. Well, I mean, I guess you can adjust. You can adjust where you place your fingers on the frets to get.
Yeah, it would be
sounds from
really
different
hard.
strings.
It would be really hard. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he shouldn't have given up anymore.
Says I.
Yeah. I'm just going to come over and cut a few of your strings, Matt, and see how you like it.
When I've got a drawer full of extra strings. That's an every year slam dunk Christmas gift for my stocking from dear Padme. She knows that she can always fill up a good portion of my stocking just with extra guitar strings, and I'll be pleased as can
delighted.
be.
It's a good Christmas this year with Thacker household.
Yeah. I like how he says after he had seen to all his needs, his mind slowly started to reawaken itself. I was like, homeboy, now it reawakens. So this guy does more asleep than I could ever do awake.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I get what he's saying. He's a very creative mind, right?
Yes.
And he doesn't even, it's interesting though, that he doesn't even consider this survival stuff, this tremendous resourcefulness that he's demonstrating as being awake. Activity. Yeah. It just, he does it on cruise control.
Rote actions,
which is so interesting how his mind just took over for him.
Yeah.
And just got stuff done. And we actually see a lot of the same stuff echoing in later chapters, building up a functioning shelter and living situation with everything he needs. And he even assembles a small stockpile of foodstuffs in case of an emergency. We see him do that in Tarbean in a couple of chapters, right?
Yep.
With money. His mind just does these things. And it's so fascinating.
Yes, it is. I think it might be that him telling the story, he's got such a high expectation and knowledge for what he's capable of that to him it feels like he's operating at 1/50th capacity or something.
That's true.
But to us, it's like, you were so efficient. You put a snare and caught 2 rabbits in 2 days.
In 2 days, yeah.
I could never do that.
I would just content myself with eating the mushrooms, and I don't even like mushrooms.
Yeah. Yep. But there's a really cool line near the beginning. It just says, an intensity of indifference that only grief can promote.
Dude, I wrote down that same note.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's so good. It kind of speaks to what we're just talking about, right? That the intensity of indifference that only grief can promote. He's so indifferent to the things that he's doing that he's not striving to make much better. It's like just enough to get by. A little food storage maybe, but not like you said, not awakening his brain to like really make this a go, right?
Right. Yeah.
Just intense indifference.
Intense indifference. It sounds like a friggin' title of an emo song. An intensity of indifference that only grief can promote. Yeah.
Be a good lyric. I feel like you could pretty easily just kind of walk through this book and write down a couple things per page and get some.
And you have a song. Yeah.
Get a song going.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to keep I said before, I'd keep a running tally of the times when he refused help. I also want to keep a running tally of the heroes that we see show up in these chapters. And to me, Seth and Jake fit that bill. We'll see that a little more in the next chapter.
Yeah.
But
you've labeled them as heroes. I think I've noted them in my notes as human kindness.
That's probably a more apt description for them.
Well, no, it either works. I did a similar kind of idea. I'm like, you can see in these chapters acts of extreme human, I don't know, struggling with the word, which is
just
that, but also
charity,
the opposite.
Like,
but also the opposite.
yeah,
You can
yeah,
see
absolutely
inflicting pain and just
animalistic
people that are evil and
feral,
animal and just scraping and no regard for other humans. And it's almost like he's, it's almost like ping pong with this set of chapters going back and forth between humanity and inhumane, right?
Yeah,
and we even see it in some of the stories that we get to read here come out too.
For sure. But
yes,
then you have
Jake,
these.
My favorite part of Jake and Seth is, as heroes, and I agree they are, is it's actually the next chapter. But
Should
anyway,
we go to it?
let's go to it.
Shall we transition to it?
Yes, let's transition to it.
Okay, this chapter is called Bloody Hands into Stinging Fists. So, Jake and Seth's wagon with Kvothe in tow makes its way through the city of Tarbean, which grows in noise, crowd, smell, and everything else you'd expect in a city the further in that they go. They eventually stop in a place called Seaward Square and unload. Seth asks what Kvothe is doing in town, why he was coming to town in the first place, to which Kvothe replies that he's out to buy some new lute strings. And Seth and Jake, observant of the obvious, make a heartfelt pitch to Kvothe. They'll be right here in this spot until after dark. Well, until dark, maybe a little after. If Kvothe wants, he would be more than welcome to return home with them. They could use the help around the farm. His wife had just said so, right, Jake? Right, Pops. Kvothe stammers a thanks but no thanks, thinking only of the fact that if he goes with them, that he'll have to explain, to remember. And he plunges himself into the city alone. It's not long before Kvothe is lost in this massive, dirty city, and it's not long after that he's accosted by an older street rat boy and his gang in a secluded alley. He doesn't stand a chance as they take his loot and guess at how much it will fetch from the Tarbean equivalent, I think, of a pawn shop. Desperate Kvothe makes a valiant attempt to snatch the loot back and get away, but he fails. He ends up being thrown to the ground, and in the process falls on top of his father's loot, and it is crushed. Not only is the loot crushed, but he is beat savagely until he is saved by a city watchman who comes to break things up and then promptly picks the helpless, broken Kvothe's meager pockets and leaves him lying alone in the alley. Sometime later, he comes to, sets his own broken nose, and mourns the loss of his loot, and the boys had taken all the broken pieces that might have had any sort of value to still try to sell. There's nothing left for Kvothe. And he sets off towards Seaward Square, praying he's not too late for Jake and Seth. He was too late. Bruised, broken, bloody, concussed, and starving, Kvothe finds some empty crates in an alley to curl up behind and enters again through that first door of his mind, sleep. It was the first night of 3 years that he would spend in Tarbean.
We talked earlier about that second and a half door, right, between sleep and madness, and it feels like hobbling back to Seaward Square. He kind of came out of that little second and a half door for a minute. I was like, I can't be. This is crazy.
Right? Yeah.
No matter how much pain it is to open up my brain, I got to get out of here.
Right.
And go with these nice people. It feels like it opened for like a second, you know, and then he's shot right back behind it again. Probably.
Oh man. Yeah, your heart just breaks for him. You're like, please let Jake and Seth be there. Please let Jake and Seth be there. Of course they're not there.
Yeah,
Dang it.
Of course they're not there.
Dang it.
We'll talk maybe a little bit more about that in Devi After Dark, but
right.
Yeah, it'd be a very different story maybe had they been.
For sure.
And if he weren't, it was still just barely after dark. If he weren't, deathly hobbled, maybe he could have just run after them, right? And found the wagon, like catch up, find the wagon,
Yeah,
for sprightly young boy.
Mm-hmm.
But he's beaten all to hell and there's no way he could do it.
Yep.
We do have, just for Sock and Sus Mapas for a second, because we're in Tarbean, which, is one of
the few places.
We spend almost this entire book, in this little corner of the map. So remember, if you go to the kind of the bottom left quadrant, you can see Tarbean there.
Yeah.
And
coastal.
That's a coastal harbor city. And you remember Hallowfell, way over to the left, is where they left Abinthy with his new wife.
bride.
And so they've been, you can kind of put the pieces together, they've been kind of traveling probably, east toward Tarbean, he and his family, before they were accosted, right? And probably made it most of the way to Tarbean.
Yeah,
right,
for him
through
to have
those
walked.
roads they were on. And then, now he's kind of stumbled on his way. It's possible they went north or something, but most likely they were just kind of heading east that way toward Tarbean.
Right.
Just a quick map.
Interesting.
It doesn't, it's about the last good map update we get.
Yeah, we need a whole map of Tarbean now. Goodness gracious.
Big city. Yep.
Yeah. And it even points out that the last of twilight had faded from the sky by the time I found the square, right? A beautiful little sad little metaphor about hope, maybe. But,
yes. Well done, Pat.
Yeah.
Golf clap for Pat. Yeah, that part where he says, where the dad, what's his name? I missed the hero's name again. The son is Seth.
Dad is Seth. Son is Jake.
Yes, right. So Seth, where he says, he just re-stresses it because he can see it's not getting through. He says, "You hear me? You can come back with us."
Right.
Like, just to make sure it gets through. Like, hero, man, he's trying so hard. Like, he can see. He didn't see it, right? He didn't see early. This kid is not just on an errand. Like, he's alone, truly alone and broken, and needs help, right? And when he sees that, his tone just changes to like, "Oh no, yeah, look, we got to help him."
Yeah, you can almost hear it. When it like switches for him, he says, "Oh my boy, my boy," and you can just feel that tenderness.
Yeah,
and like, oh man, I love this guy. I love him.
Yeah.
And I hope he just sells all sorts of squash. And just
I hope he gets rid of all of them. And poor little Kvothe, just so broken, he can't accept the kindness.
Man. Yeah.
Because he doesn't think he deserves warmth, or because he doesn't want to deal with the memories coming back.
Yeah.
He thinks he'd have to share his story. It's maybe a little both.
He even says anything was better than opening that door.
Yeah.
But then later he thinks about, you said in that fit of that door peeking open a little bit, soft bread and butter, songs while riding in a wagon, a safe place, a new home. Like, that's pretty darn great too.
It's amazing what getting the shit beat out of you can do to your point of view.
Yeah. Well, soft bread and butter, songs while riding in a wagon. That was his life, right?
Yeah.
That was what he had with his parents before.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it is also interesting. At the very beginning of this chapter, he misplaces his lute for like a half an hour.
Yeah.
Which is a little surprising. And I wonder if Pat's trying to show us that, like with people, these things fade, right? Like you can start to get some sense of normalcy to the point where you're not, needing this thing that you clutch all the time. Right?
Building a shelter for it.
Right.
Building a shelter for yourself. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point.
I mean, it's almost like a shield for him, right? Against like really living. As long as I have this thing, I can just play my music and not deal with anything.
For sure.
And for a minute, he lives and unloads the wagon and makes connections with other humans and doesn't need the loot as badly, right?
Yeah. One thing that I think Pat has pointed out before, because I think we've talked about it, but I can't think of the specific instance, but really starts to hit hard during these Tarbean chapters, is the hypocrisy of religion, right? And And we see a lot of that little theme coming up. He doesn't hit us over the head too hard with it. But you start to see it here. The two kids in, what's the kid's name? Pike? Is that the bully's name?
Pike's the leader, yeah.
Yeah, he's got his two little buddies. And his one little buddy is chastising the other one for taking Telu's name in vain. Do not call on Telu save in the greatest need, for Telu judges every thought and deed. Yet this is the kid that elbows Kvothe in the head, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's it's one of those things where there are people that have had those stories drilled into them so much that it's just kind of part of their personality almost, but they don't act.
But they're missing the mark completely.
They don't act in any way that matches it. My favorite part of that whole exchange is when the guy that is not spouting the religion says, "Your mom's a penny whore," and the guy says, "Don't talk about my mom, Lynn." And the guy goes, "Iron pennies." It's my favorite part.
It's like even the cheapest
it's like
of
even
the
worse.
pennies. And then he just waits for them to get in a fight.
Yes. Iron penny. I laughed out loud. Do you know what Nalt is?
No idea.
Thing, I wrote it. I'm like, what is this?
Is it kind of a derogatory term of
for a redhead? For what? For a 12-year-old? I don't know what it is.
I actually wrote it down to look it up and then I didn't.
Yeah.
No, there's nothing on it online.
I did look it up too. I forgot that I looked it up. All that I got was like genealogy websites. Right, of like because it's like a last name apparently, not a hugely popular one, but nothing historically.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, where he gets it from.
It's like nerd or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
wuss, just like those light derogatory names you fling at people.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I want to go back to the religion real quick, and you're right. It's only really because again it's something that I think Pat does, and we'll see it later with something the Denner resin that he talks about, but he just in a completely casual way he brings up what is going to be a major part of this city and the life here, right? And a big part really of the novel as a whole, but it's just in this background, these background characters
it's
exchanging this thing.
Such a clever way of doing it.
It's so brilliant.
Yeah, it's like indirect world building or casual world building. That's what I'll call it. Casual world building.
And we're so used to that with George, right? George does it so well, but I almost think Pat is a little subtler with it.
I think so too. I think a little more casual, and I love that. Yeah. He says some brilliant stuff in this. The sound it made, talking about falling on the lute, and the sound that the lute made when being crushed. The sound it made was like a dying dream.
Yes.
Remember how good he's gotten at equating feelings to sound, right? Through the music.
There we go. It's coming back.
Wow. But and again, just that fascination of the lute had helped stave off his memories, but it was also his one connection back to family, particularly his dad.
Yes.
So that touch point is now gone.
Yeah. And like we've been saying, he's been using it. It is a touch point for him, but also he's been using it as a distraction to not really deal with things. Is he going to have to now? Right.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So what takes its place?
Exactly. Just survival, I guess. We'll find out. Something George does really well too, that I think Pat does a little bit differently here, but at the very end, that was the first night of nearly 3 years I spent in Tarbean. Just as you ended your summary,
just boom,
just hit you with it. Like you're
spoiler
hopeful,
alert.
like okay, he had the sense to get out, right? He wanted to go with the wagon. Maybe he'll just go to Seaward Square and wait for him to come back. He'll just go there every day and they'll come back. He got to sell more than once ever. So they'll come back and he'll find him or something.
Yep.
And it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, he's going to spend 3 years in this place.
Yeah.
3 years is a long time. So he's 12. So, he's gonna stay here till he's like 15. And my heart just ached the first time I read that. Of course, this
Word.
reread, I knew it, but the first time I
Word.
read it, I was just like, what? No.
Yeah. Oof. Mhm.
Hmm.
And he's not in a good place health-wise. How many times did he hit his head in this one chapter? At least
Well, I
3.
don't know.
At least 3 times he hits his head in this chapter.
Yeah.
And there's more. There's more head hitting coming down
There's
the road.
lots more striking of all sorts of body parts.
Yeah. That many hard head hits against head surfaces, that messes you up, man.
Yeah, I would think so. Kvothe is apparently has a resilient brain, I guess.
Or he's completely insane right now.
Yeah. It's hard to read, thinking about a 12-year-old. You've got
sustaining these injuries. Yeah.
I've got someone a little younger than that. I just like thinking about them taking injuries like that is
right.
Hard.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of a sport where concussions are an issue that they're working on. And, the dealing with the CTE, the post-traumatic stuff from their playing days, a lot of players having a lot of trouble with it, right?
It's funny. I
with
feel like I
their
hear that
emotional
in the NFL.
and mental health.
I feel like I hear that like the NFL getting like lambasted for that, but I don't hear about the NHL that much. Do they? Are they getting like sued and attacked? And
maybe I don't see as much legal stuff, but you've had, I can think of 4 or 5 guys off the top of my head. I could name their names for you, who have died as a result of suicide. And studying their brain afterwards, they had severe amounts of CTE from concussions, a lot of it due to fighting. But
oh, really?
Yeah, taking punches to a lot of these guys were former enforcers in the NHL, big time fighters, and took a lot of headshots. So
remember when they didn't have to wear helmets?
Can you imagine, man?
Like,
can you imagine
how many people died of CTE before? Like,
the game wasn't as fast as it is now, but it's still
physics
a
are a
hard sheet of ice.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The NFL's doing all sorts of stuff with like for helmet technology to try to like improve it and stuff.
The frequency of head hits are a lot higher in the NFL just because there's more players out there. Their job is to run into each other. And so.
Yeah, that's one thing they say that maybe wasn't something they originally thought, but like just the offensive defensive lines, it's not like they're running dozens of feet and colliding, but
it's just over and over again.
Small impacts.
And it's not just on Sunday, right? It's all week. It's during practice and right. So with hockey, it's like it's less frequent, but when they hit, their head is smacking that ice, or that fist is just connecting right there, or whatever. So
like, how does boxing get away with anyway? You guys are listening to a sports cast. Did you know that? Sports cast that sometimes talks about music and The Office.
Yeah, I love it.
What else you got for bloody hands and a stinging fist, Matt?
I think that's all I got.
All right.
Yep.
Well, let's go ahead and move to basement, bread, and bucket. He had been a month living in Tarbean, and today was a begging day. Having tried thieving the day prior and receiving a nasty blow to the head, hey, look at that, another blow to the head. He was content to beg for paltry sums today, but he saw 2 younger boys in an excited exchange run off, and Kvothe's curiosity got the better of him. The boys disappeared into a burned-out basement and reappeared with hunks of bread in their hands. So he made his own way down into the basement. It was chill, damp, and dark, and the door to the place was in tatters. As he stepped through, a low, almost animal moan froze him in his steps. When he pushed through, he saw children. Children laying in cots or on blankets on the floor, one sitting on the ground, gently pounding his head against a stone wall. Looking closer, those on the cots were tied down. Everything within Kvothe told him get out of that place. But then a man emerged with a what? And his feet slapping barefoot against the stone floor. This man did not feel like a sinister torturer to Kvothe. Indeed not. The man offered him as much bread as he'd eat if Kvothe would simply carry some water for him. Trappist was his name, and he's a saint, caring for palsied, crippled, and otherwise inflicted children that everyone else would have just let pass on. He restrained them because they might hurt themselves or others in the very conditions that they had. And he spent his life taking care of them with unending patience in this stone, damp basement. The hopeless creatures of Tarbean were welcome with Trappist, and that earned him a fierce loyalty among the children who felt they had this one place in the world where they could retreat to if they needed to, for water, or a little food, or even some safety from the cruel streets of Tarbean. And that's the end of this chapter.
And I felt a fair amount of guilt the first time when I read this, because you're like, oh, this is a bad place. And this is not a good place. Whoever is running this show is the worst of the worst, abuser of children and everything. And it turns out he's this really great guy. And you're like, oh, sorry, Trappist.
He totally set us up.
Oh, awful. Yeah.
He totally set us up.
It's like horror story there for a second. It's like, I got a soft spot for children, man. And you're gonna push on that soft spot. Oh, I'm not gonna like this. I'm not gonna like this. And no, he saves that for a later chapter.
Trappist also has a soft spot for children.
Oh my goodness.
And so we go, we got Seth and Jake. We got the kids that just beat the shit out of him for no reason at all and steal his stuff.
And the city watchman
that does the same.
Yep.
Yeah, the city watchman does the same. And then we also have the bookkeeper guy who doesn't let him sleep in the doorway, a minor, certainly not as on the same level as the others, but just total lack of kindness. And then we get Trappist at the opening of this chapter.
Devoted his whole life to helping the helpless.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I hate it, but I picture Trappist. I hate it because I don't like this character.
Are we going to fan cast? Are we?
Yeah, he's not a good character. Do you remember the torturer guy, the albino in The Princess Bride?
No way.
That's who I picture, but like a less without the mouth sore and whatever. But that's what I picture for Trappist.
Okay,
just slapping around and
That's probably better than who I've got. I've got the guy from Stranger Things. I can't think of his name. The guy who speaks Russian.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
What is his name?
Yeah, I can't remember.
It's gonna bother me till I find it. Murray, that's his name. Murray.
Oh, in Stranger Things, his name is Murray. Yeah.
Brett Gelman is the actor's name.
Brett Gelman.
That's who I've got for Trappies.
All right, cool. Weird that we both fan cast that. It almost seems like we plan these things. Listeners, we don't. We don't ever talk about what we're going to talk about. We don't share our notes. We don't.
We can't emphasize enough how little we talk about. We talk between episodes.
Yeah.
That's what makes it fun. We do a ton of preparation on our own, and then we come and just mash all of our preparation together, and it ends up being a great time.
It is for us anyway.
Yep. Yeah, I love how he describes him as someone who looked at us as if we were human, not animals in rags. And in return, we loved him with a silent ferocity that only animals can match. Right?
Yeah. I guess the only part that bothers me is I don't know why there wouldn't just be a billion kids there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would you ever leave this place? Right? It's safe at least, right? It's shelter. Like maybe there's a sense of like, well, let's let the people that really need it today use it, and I'll just come back when I really need it too. Like almost a sense of community among these children that need help. They're like, I'll need Trappist someday, but somebody else probably needs them today.
Yeah, there's like an understanding of this social contract.
An unwritten code or something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And also I wonder, when Trappist does get all this bread, where does he get it from?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Does he have a guy on the inside that
brings
shuffles him day old bread instead of throwing it out? I don't know.
Yeah, a little pita Malark.
Exactly. Little Peter Malark.
You didn't know this, but this is a podcast about.
What is this
Yeah,
podcast about? I don't even know anymore, man.
They talk about the church. The Tellin Church sometimes gives away bread. Maybe, maybe he's got some line to that or something.
Right.
Yeah, this guy's a gift to humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have made it into the room?
No, I don't think I would have.
Yeah, I think that moan would have turned me around.
Yep.
I'm like, I'm hungry, but I'm not that hungry.
Yep.
And I've never been that hungry, I guess. I've always had a meal when I got that hungry. So maybe I would, but.
And maybe that is what keeps the billions of kids away. I don't know. Just the kids that are.
But once you do go in, it's like Disneyland. It's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Got this kind guy here. He's like Santa Claus almost, gives me stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Just got to do a couple chores for him and I'm good to go. Yeah.
These poor feet. Trappist's poor feet that are swollen.
And Kvothe knows exactly what to do.
Yes. But I hope he helps. We don't get it, but I hope he helps him sometime.
Yeah.
Hey man, put your feet up. Do these things.
At the very least, yeah, you just got to do this. This is one of those things. This is one of those things of what's the quote that you love? I've got it here. The intensity of indifference. That Kvothe reawakening his brain. He could probably set him up as like this street doctor type guy that and probably make some money and
it's true,
just like helping people and treating certain things, but his mind's just not even there right now. He can't even, his mind hasn't awoken to that part.
He just knows the second he made a dime, Pike would just come beat him up for it, probably.
Yeah, probably.
But you're right. I mean, you're right. There's certainly ways it seems like he could make some money. But, it's like you need $1 million to make $1 million. Like, he can't, no one will come see Dr. Kvothe if he's, no one that has any money anyway, unless he's got a business. Well, he can't get a business until he sets up the business to make the money to get the business.
Yeah. That's how things work.
Yeah.
He's got another blow to the head, as you mentioned. And he does mention being dizzy the next day. I mean, I'm going to be focusing on this. This guy's got some head trauma. He's got some head trauma. And not good. Okay. I don't have too much more on this one.
Me neither. You're going to have to, you're going to get me having to really start looking up head trauma and its effects.
Right. Over time.
Starting to bring all sorts of theories in about some of his more erratic behaviors.
Because a lot of times it doesn't manifest itself until later. Yeah. So maybe it's different for everybody. That's why it's so hard to treat, is it's different for everybody.
Maybe between that and the Alar stuff, that's why Kvothe has these two personalities that Bast is trying to wrangle. It's just
part of it is
stage head trauma.
Yeah, is actual physical trauma in
addition to everything else. I bet on the Davos Fingers podcast.
Yep.
It's not a theory I've seen out there.
In the expansive Kingkiller Chronicle fandom. Okay, should we go to a time for demons?
Let's do it.
This is my longest summary, so I apologize in advance, but there's a lot to cover here. Learning comes naturally to Kvothe, as we know, and that holds true after his first few months in Tarbean. He learned a lot about food and where to get it. He learns a lot about where to hide. He even finds and lays claim to his own little loft atop an old tannery. And he learned just how big Tarbean is. You could live your whole life there, he claims, and never know all of its parts. For all those parts, however, the city really can just be divided into two. Waterside, where the rich people live. No, wait. Waterside's where the poor people live, and Hillside, where the rich people live. One winter day, Kvothe decided to throw caution to the wind and try begging amongst the rich of Hillside, a quest few beggars have the bravery to embark upon. It seemed almost like a formal ball to Kvothe compared to the brutal reality of Waterside. There were clean streets, polite vendors, everyone in clean clothes. They all seemed to be participating in some sort of intricate social dance, Kvothe recalls. Nevertheless, Kvothe played the part of pitiful beggar approaching a pretty young lady and coming away with a whole silver penny, way more than he'd ever received, enough to fill his belly every night for half a month, he says. She was sweet, and Kvothe thanked her profusely, but he lingered, and he was noticed. A shopkeeper informed a guard, a police officer type of guy maybe, who before long was chasing Kvothe through alleys unfamiliar. He runs into a dead end and is immediately accosted by the guard. What is with Kvothe getting jumped in alleys, Scad? It's just a thing. The guard was mad for making him look bad for begging while on his watch, and he takes it out on Kvothe intensely. Probably another concussion, a cracked rib, multiple contusions from beaten over and over with a club. And at the end of it all, no more silver penny. He lost it somehow. Broken and delirious, Kvothe slowly and painfully began to make his way back to the familiar confines of Waterside. It actually was a place he wanted to go to after what he just experienced. But he was miles away from his loft, and he soon found himself at night lying in the snow, sleep drawing over him like a thick blanket, like death, he describes. And yeah, dude, you're going to die probably. Okay, so I need to pause here real quick to just do some world building. This time of year that we're in right now is the time of the midwinter pageantry. It's a week-long-ish religious holiday commemorating the god Telu's victory over the super demon Incanus. The 7 days are kind of like an adult Halloween-ish. Starting on the first day of the pageant, there's demons played by troopers like Kvothe's troop of old, or by just actual townsfolk in this case, who run around causing mostly harmless mayhem. They are led by another actor who plays Incanus, who's clad in a black mask of his own. And finally, a silver-clad actor portrays Telu, who goes about the city catching the demons. And this happens all throughout the week. On the 7th day, he finally catches Incanus, and this ushers in the new year. Sounds kind of fun, to be honest, if not a little bit like mayhem almost. It's like sort of sounds like The Purge to me, that movie The Purge, where just people have free range to just do crazy stuff.
I've never seen any of those movies, but I agree with you when you said like Halloween. I kind of like The Purge.
Yeah, a little bit, right? Okay. So world building done, we're back to Kvothe. As he's drifting off into what would certainly, in my mind, be his death, he imagines death itself descending upon him like a great bird with wings of fire. But the pain at being moved jolts him back to reality, and he realizes he's being rolled over by Incanus, or the actor portraying Incanus anyways. The Lord of the Demons, accompanied by a female demon companion, have stopped to help him. The companion wants to keep Incanus moving. Telu is on their tail, and they'll be caught if they don't continue on. But Incanus is adamant. This poor, freezing, and beaten boy needs their help. He massages some heat back into Kvothe's body, even as his companion warns him that if they are caught with him, their pursuers will assume they did the beating. Reluctantly agreeing, the Incanus actor counsels the boy to not lie back down, to find someplace inside to warm himself up. And then he gifts Kvothe his own gloves, nice gloves, and a silver freaking talent, which is a ton of money. Barely believing what he's holding in his numb fingers, Kvothe makes his way, trailing blood in his wake, to the first inn he can find, and he asks 2 girls in the kitchen doorway to bring him food and a blanket. Horrified, they rush to comply, bringing him back a banquet of spiced wine, a loaf of fresh bread, a turkey breast, a warm blanket, and even his change in a little pouch. They even offer him a place by their fire, but hearing a lute playing from within at the inn, Kvothe declines and somehow makes it back to Casa de Kvothe. Belly full, he falls into a fitful sleep, awakened at midnight by the city bells, for a new year had begun. That's the end of the chapter.
It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I really like this chapter. But I have questions. And
I'd be disappointed if you didn't.
So I agree with you. The festival sounds fun. It sounds like, a little chaos, but like it's in fun. They're not supposed to do like any real harm. It sounds like it's,
and all someone has to do is invoke
is-
Telu's name and people back off and
they run away screaming and it's fun, right? It sounds fun. The worst thing that happens is, you get tickled and somebody throws your hat in the snowbank, maybe. Although it sounds like in Waterside, maybe things get a little bit rougher, perhaps.
Sure.
But mostly it sounds fun. But then we get Garrick and Holly, the Incanus that saves him. And they seem actually afraid to get caught. Holly is she does say the beating thing, right? That they're going to assume that we did this, but that's later. It's a little bit later in the sequence. She's already really worried about getting caught.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's real stakes to this for them. And it makes me question whether this is all on the up and up, or like,
is this how they do things at Tarbean?
Are there real consequences to this?
Right.
for at least for Encantement, like are they two people on death row or something? And if they get caught, they're dead. And if they escape, they get free?
Yeah. Or if if he's not the actual Incanus, they're using this opportunity to mask up and escape, right? Like,
yeah, maybe. Well, I don't know. But it seems like there's some real sense of alarm from them about getting caught when the way the story goes is you get caught. It's scripted. The new year comes, and what signifies the new year is you getting caught. So they're supposed to get caught.
Mm-hmm.
But they seem really worried about it.
Right.
So there's something, I don't know what it is, but there's something about it that bothers me. And I don't know whether it's, some of this other, religion stuff that's, that we've talked a little bit about already, or what? Did any of those things alarm you?
It did catch me a little off guard, like, what? You're supposed to get caught. So part of me wonders is if these were like, so we know that the townspeople, the ones just playing the demons, they're just normal townspeople. But I wonder if like Telu and Incanus were actual kind of like actors that they'd hire. It sounds like lots of towns and villages and cities do that. They hire actual troopers to go and do this. Kvothe's troop did it before. So I wondered if they've got a part to play and it's like, we can't get caught until midnight, right? So we've got to stay ahead of this crew so that we don't get caught and mess up the story.
Okay.
It's not as fun an explanation, but it went through my mind as maybe she's just like, we got a part to play. We got to do this right.
I'll try to read it again with that in mind. And like, maybe, she's just trying to fulfill the role.
Another part of me wonders,
you're right. Telu would look the other way, but the 50 townspeople with him are going to find him, right? And
we got him.
Yeah. Right.
And he's like, no, we're not yet.
Nope. That can't be him. Just a guy in a robe.
But then the other part of me was like, what I said is maybe this isn't the actual actor Incanus. This is a guy dressed up as Incanus who did something bad and is now trying to get away. And so he can't get caught because they'll unmask him Scooby-Doo style. And they'll be like, Mr. So-and-so, you're supposed to be in prison right now.
Interesting. Okay.
So I don't know. There is
like
a major sense of urgency. There's a major sense of urgency from Holly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a little off-putting to me.
Holly's short for hallelujah. That's a popular character in the Hold Steady verse, right? The band The Hold Steady. They write lots of songs. They've like recurring characters throughout their songs. One of their main characters is Holly. Yeah. One of your favorite songs is How a Resurrection Really Feels. That's from Holly's perspective.
It's a really good one.
Yeah.
Before we move on from Incanus and get back more to focus stuff, it is, I think, I don't know if it's irony or we're just supposed to chuckle, but interesting that the person that saves him from what appears to be literally, the angel of death that's about to enclose upon Kvothe is supposedly the most powerful demon that would be opposing that angel.
Exactly.
Rolls him over and saves him, which is either saying commentary about the church and how misdirected it is, or maybe it's just supposed to be funny, or maybe it's trying to tell us, the story is a little wrong. Maybe Incanus isn't as bad as we think, or there's some misdirection in there somewhere.
Right.
Or maybe it's just meant to play into this kindness theme that we've talked about, right? You can get kindness from the people you would least expect, and the people you would expect kindness from, maybe you wouldn't get it. So maybe it's just playing into that theme.
I think so. The quote when Telu and his followers are passing by Kvothe is, all eyes were for Telu. No one saw me standing in the shadows of the doorway. Right. Whereas Incanus stopped and risked something big-ish, we don't quite know what, to help him. And not only helped him, but set him up big time. Didn't just give him a couple pennies, gave him a whole freaking talent.
Yes.
And some gloves to help with his immediate needs. Just a really great dude. Just a really great dude.
Or at least a dude in a really good moment, at least.
Yeah.
Right. We've talked before about, good people versus good actions. And but at least a person in a really good moment. Yeah. But
very reminiscent of the story of the Good Samaritan in the Bible.
Yes.
One I'm sure you're very familiar with, Scatty.
I am familiar with it. I could not recite it all to you, but I know the basic theme.
Yeah. Stops and helps when he wasn't expected to, and not only helps with the immediate needs, but sets him up for the future and all sorts of good stuff. So
I mean, I don't think it's overly dramatic to say that he saves his life here. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said in my summary, he was going to die.
Yeah. Seems that way. Yep. The symbolism shows it, and he's in rough shape.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, he's talking about hillside versus waterside, beggars, thieves, and whores versus solicitors, politicians, and courtesans. And I loved it because it's so true. If you have money, you get away with so much more crap, and you just get treated so differently. I mean, we don't like to get too political too often, but Trump, all these lawsuits, right? And people are like, well, we can't possibly actually go after him for these things. Why not? They're crimes, right? Well, it's because he's rich and got, that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Just get different labels, different opportunities, different
opportunities. A certain very famous actor had all his charges dropped in a manslaughter case today. So
yeah, I heard that.
Which is definitely depending on how you feel about that. But apparently even the demons were polite on the good side of town. And of course, the tremendous dripping irony of this chapter is that he takes the most savage beating of any beating he's ever received on the good side of town. And then his life is saved by the Lord of Demons in the bad side of town. Right.
Yeah. And on that good side of town, it's funny because there are good people. He's met with kindness by the first person he talks to.
I'll put another person on the list.
The woman is aghast at his presence. You could argue maybe she's donating almost out of shock as much as a desire to do good. I don't know. But she's willing to give money. And do you think they just don't know all these kids living in squalor in water?
I think so.
They're just totally.
She's like you said, aghast, is completely taken aback, not used to seeing it.
Yeah.
It almost is implied, maybe I just inferred it from the text, that she does engage him a little bit, and I almost inferred that she'd engage him even more. She was willing to keep talking to him, and maybe this would lead to getting further help. And instead, he's run off at that point. But it is something where you get used to it. Even, I took my wife to Brazil. It's over a year ago now, and tremendous poverty, right? In some places where we were. And when she first arrived, she was aghast. She would see, and she wanted to help everybody who she saw. And by the end of it, we hate to say this, but that callousness had already formed, and we were walking right past it and barely noticing it, at that point, because we were just we've grown accustomed to it even after just a week. So,
I mean, it's not just Brazil, right? I mean, like,
Sure.
am I any better?
You can
than
go
this
downtown
woman
here in
who-
Salt Lake and
I don't do anything to help anybody. I don't, like, I mean, I donate some things here and there, but like, I'm just like this woman. I'm like, oh, if I'm confronted with it, it's like, oh, that's jarring. Yes, let me help you. I'm confronted with
Right.
it, but like, I know it's out there. She's got to know that there are people suffering, and like these people do nothing. I don't do anything, right? It makes me feel awful, and I think it's a
we're able
really
to push
deft
it to our
way.
periphery.
And I think it's a really deft way for Pat to have us judge these people that aren't helping,
Mhm.
and then like maybe realize we should be pointing that back at us as well,
Examine
right?
ourselves.
Because
Yeah.
I know there are kids I could help that I'm not helping, that are going through maybe not quite this bad, but pretty bad.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like, I wonder if they maybe give to the church and think, like a lot of people do, in our
Absolutely.
world, give to various churches, and that alleviates the guilt part of it, at least.
Yep. You're
Well,
looking at one
I'm
of
not
them, for sure.
implying that you do it to alleviate
Out of guilt. No, I know you're not.
But I think it can help with that too for some people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I just bet the Talon Church at least probably just doesn't use it very appropriately.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
And we see how reckless they are in attempts to make money. They're the ones that sold the thousands of demon masks. It says the church did it. The church sold the thousands of demon masks.
Yes.
That led to mayhem in the streets.
It sounds way more fun though, too, to involve the people like that. I mean, yeah.
Right.
But anyway.
As long as there's that understanding.
Yes. You're not actually committing crimes. Yeah. Yeah.
Let's just keep count here, Scad. We've got head blows number 5 and 6 happening in this chapter. So yep. I mean, 4 major concussions will end a hockey player's career ish. It's different for everybody.
Yeah.
He's gotten 5 or 6 and he's 13. So
Tua Tagovailoa is a quarterback in the NFL, and he came out today and said he had considered retiring over the offseason because he had 2 official concussions.
Yeah.
And one that they said it wasn't a concussion, but kind of looked like a concussion at the time. So yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Maybe it's less a deal for kids. It seems like it'd be worse for kids.
I think so. I think it would be worse for kids.
Do we know any brain surgeons in the fandom? Let's get some.
Let's talk to some people here.
Stuff. Should we talk about the other minor heroes of the chapter?
Our little girls at the Laughing Man Inn. Yeah.
Yes. These poor things. Right? These poor.
It's going to be horrifying.
Like this kid just
this bloody
out of the
shambling.
Shadows. Yeah. And I got it, like, based on how these chapters were going, the first time I read this, I was like, they're just going to take the money. Yeah. They're not rich.
That's what I thought too.
Take the money and shut the door.
The money, went inside, never coming back out. Mm-hmm. I thought the same thing.
But Pat surprised me again. But because it was time for a bad thing, right? We had Incarnus was a good thing. It was time for a bad thing. I thought they were totally going to screw him over.
I did too. And instead, just like Incarnus, they come back and give him perhaps more than what he could have expected. Some warm wine, some meat. All he was expecting was a little bit of bread, maybe, and a blanket.
Yeah.
And not only did they give him that, but an offer to hang out. That's another what if that maybe we'll talk about later. Offered a corner by the fire.
And again, it felt so heartfelt from them, right? Like they mean it. They're like, come in, please.
She even it says she reached for him, like to grab his arm and be like, come on in. Like, hang. Yeah. It feels like this is it's like Halloween and Christmas combined with New Year's too.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a time where after all the mischief and mayhem, people are really kind and maybe a little more charitable to each other. Like it happens around the holidays.
It's interesting. Like the Christian religion doesn't really have a festival around like the defeat of Satan or of Lucifer. They don't have any.
It's kind of Easter. Easter is kind of
Oh, I guess because it's like sin is conquered, like
Christ
yeah.
overcoming sin and
Yeah.
death.
Yeah, I suppose so.
So,
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's overcoming the temptation of sin, and yeah, okay.
Yep. And
So
death
it's
that
Eastery. It's
commemorates his
Eastery,
resurrection.
Eastery, New
A
Year's,
little bit of
Christmassy,
Easter.
Halloweeny.
Yeah, it's let's
The
try to get
smorgasbord of
the
holidays.
4th of July, maybe. I don't know. Arbor Day.
Arbor Day.
They have pine needles, but
There, yes,
to Arbor
that's
Day
right.
on Christmas.
That's right. And the boughs, the tree boughs. Yeah.
Yeah, they gave him his change back because they could have, maybe they bring him the supplies, but then they're like, well, that's all your money. That's
Yeah, sorry.
Inflation, right?
We took a great risk. That's our reward. We're keeping the rest.
Right. Yep, exactly. Return him that money. But
I mean, what a relief it must have felt like to get that back, the money
Mhm.
and the goods, right?
Yeah.
Just like, okay, that didn't go wrong. I have this, right? And yet he's in such a terrible state. We're about to read what a terrible state he's in.
Yeah.
But why not? Maybe we'll cover this in Debbie After Dark. But why not go back to the Laughing Man? They seem like they could be friends. These young, nice, kind girls. Knows the play.
A couple of poignant quotes. The pain of hearing music but not being able to play. The ache in my chest came from nothing more than broken ribs. They were simpler pains, easier to endure than the pain he felt at not being able to play.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wasn't sure what I was running from unless it was people. People meant pain.
Yeah.
Which is too bad because he's been approached by a few people who have absolutely been the opposite of that for him.
Yeah, he's pretty broken.
Yeah.
I wonder how long it's been since the squash guys. I think we know exactly.
I think it's still less than a year.
You think?
Oh, it does say his first few months. So
before he decided to try begging and
so what I think it was is
hillside.
Remember he arrived in Tarbean as it was starting to get cold, so I'm thinking like late summer ish. And obviously we don't follow along with the months, maybe the 12-month system like we do here, but this is like in the middle of winter at this point, so 5-6 months maybe.
Yeah, those first few months in Tarbean he learned many things. Yeah. Oh yeah, I had been in Tarbean for 2 months when I first thought to try my hand at begging hillside. So yeah, it's very early stuff.
Oh, it's fewer. Yep.
Interesting.
Okay.
You got more? You want to move on?
I think I'm ready to move on. Scad, we're going to get into some real crazy stuff now, man.
Are we? Is this where it gets crazy?
Are we?
And I apologize for my summary too. There's a story within a story. We're already a story within a story with this book. We had a story within a story within a story. In this chapter. I try to do my best here, but
we're getting some major inception.
Bullet point format here for some of this.
Go for it.
Recovery from this trauma was going to take a bit. Kvothe slept most of the next day while drinking the remainder of his wine and finishing off the bread and turkey. His body was a knot of pain, and it was a cold, sleet-filled day. It sounds awful. Then he spent the next day in and out of a fevered sleep in his spot on the roof. But racked with fever, he made his way off the roof and hobbled to Trappist's basement, falling down the stairs, probably incurring another head injury again, and thrusting his coin purse out to ask for help. Trappist, ever the saint, nursed him through his fever with his patience and a medicine bought with Kvothe's money. As he awoke, clear-eyed and feeling a little bit better, one of the boys was asking for a story. When he didn't get one, he demanded more loudly. It took Kvothe to interpret for Trappist to know what the boy wanted. And after some deliberation, Trappist settled into what was, well, apparently the only story he knew. Rather than retell it all in story mode, I'm going to try to go bullet point style here. Trappist seems pretty unsure about when all this happened and frankly stumbles on a lot of the details. Feels like a story he's heard several times and kind of knows, but which maybe the details aren't always the same when he hears it or when he tells it. Demons filled the world in the time of this story, terrible creatures that would swallow men whole or wear their skins. In Canis, as we just met, wreathed in darkness was the worst of them. Telu made the world. Telu seems like the creator, the god creator, but this story predates the existence of the Telan church. Still, Telu is there watching and judging men who were all wicked in this period, and the demons who plagued them. He's watching them too. Telu found one woman, Periel, who was not wicked. Despite much misfortune in her own life, she always treated people with kindness, and she always prayed for others. He visited her, and in a sort of immaculate conception kind of way, gave her a child. The boy, Menda, she named him, was born in 3 months, and he grew at an accelerated rate and mastered everything quickly. The kid was walking in 2 days and grew to manhood in 2 months. The town thought perhaps he was a demon spawn and confronted Periel and Menda. But Menda stepped forward and claimed to be Telu himself, Lord above all, and he was going to free the world of demons and wickedness. And he did, starting right there with this town, offering them his righteous path or one of pain and suffering that they've already been on. Many join him, and he punishes them first by striking them with the hammer, but then they are forgiven, and they begin walking his path. Some did not cross. They walked their own path, until he struck them with the hammer, driving demons out of some of them. He walked the world after this first village, offering the people the same choice everywhere he went, driving out demons, and after 7 years of this, he had cleansed the world of demons save one. You guessed it, Incanis, whom he continued to chase. Incanis destroyed 6 great cities as he fled from Telu, but as Telu arrived before he could destroy the 7th, caught Incanis, laid him low with a blow of his hammer, and carried his limp body to Atur city. But Incanis was not dead. To truly kill Incanis, Telu strapped him to a giant iron wheel that stood taller than a man. They dug a pit 15 feet wide and 20 feet deep to hold the wheel. They filled it with the boughs of evergreen trees and lit it on fire. After giving the wheel-bound Incanis one more chance to walk his side of the path, Telu lifted the great wheel above his head and thrust it flat down into the pit, now glowing hot with the embers from the great fire. But as the wheel grew hot and Incanis' smoking body strained against his bonds, the links that bound him glowed red and weakened, allowing Incanis to free one hand, then another. Before he could free anything else, Telu jumped in the fire with him, pinning Incanis to the wheel with his own body, sacrificing both of their lives. I just want to read a little bit of the end here. To ash all things return, so too this flesh will burn. But I am Telu, son of myself, father of myself. I was before and I will be after. If I am a sacrifice, then it is to myself alone. And if I am needed and called in the proper ways, then I will come again to judge and punish. Trappist continues on about the ashen gray robes of the priests and how Telu watches and keeps us safe, but is interrupted by one of his many young charges howling and thrashing against their restraints. Both drifts off back to sleep, wondering if perhaps Trappist has been a Telan priest this whole time or in his past. Both stopped by Trappist's basement many times in the months that followed, but he never heard him tell another story. And that is the end of that. So, history.
Yeah.
History. We get
history according to Trappist. According
to Trappist, perhaps a little bit of, I don't know how much of it to believe or how much not to believe. These these stories, when you hear one of them, you tend to believe it. Then you hear one that might, contradict it, and you're like, whoa, which is it?
Wait, okay. Yeah.
And, we've talked about this a lot of times with Song of Ice and Fire. Anytime you get to things being thousands of years old, especially in a world where they don't have, the greatest technology for recording things, you start to question, the validity of some of this stuff. Oral tradition isn't always perfect.
Yep.
Still, though, I don't think we walk away from it taking nothing.
Sure. Yep.
So what do you think? What do you think of the story of Telu and Incanis?
I mean, it doesn't sound all that different from traditional Christian stories that we hear, and probably other religions that I'm maybe not as familiar with. I think Rothfuss takes influence from quite a few of them, and I think he means to do that. I think that's intentional. Telu is an interesting god. Right? He's very fascinated with the whole idea of punishment and saving. There's a little problematic in my mind in terms of being a god that you want to worship. He saves only the worthy, the biggest problem with this is that if you allow the demons to run rampant and do nothing to stop it, eventually you're only going to have demons and you're not going to save anybody, right? Going back to the beginning of the story.
Yes.
No one has the opportunity to become good. So this church, according to this passage, holds the idea of like preordination of you're either bad or you're good and
apparently they're all bad.
And apparently, yeah, they're all bad. So what constitutes worthy of being saved?
Right. Only Periel, apparently, which is interesting, right?
Yep. And Periel, of course, is that voice of reason. It's not their fault that she says that the world is full of hard choices and hunger and loneliness. What can you expect of people when demons are their neighbors? I love that line. She says it a couple of times, right?
Yes. My favorite is when she says to him, I think you don't know much about what it is to be a man.
Mm-hmm. And I would still help them if I could. He follows that up, right?
Yeah.
I love that. So that's the other interesting thing is when she says that, I think you know very little about what it is to be a man. And he's like, you're right. Okay, I'll do it. But after a 3-month pregnancy, he grows up in like a matter of weeks, right? And then he instantly just embarks on destroying evil. He's not really learning what it is to be a man.
No.
Right?
No.
I don't think that's his goal, to do.
Yeah.
But that's what he says. She's like, I want you to know what it's like to be. I want you to have empathy for mankind, is basically what she's saying. And he's like, fine, I'll be a man. And then he like skips you got to have a childhood to know what it is to be a man, you know? Like,
no, yeah, you're right. That's funny. I mean, she says you don't know what it's like to be a man. Maybe he uses that to become a man but he never explicitly says, I want to learn what it's like to be a man. I think she just convinced him that you've got to give these people a second chance.
Okay.
Right? You've got to let them. But I still agree with you. I mean, he does sound a lot like, and I'm no expert, right? But he does sound a lot like the Christian God that I'm kind of familiar with, at least like the Old Testament God, right? The fire, kind of very fire and brimstony, right?
And then you think
turns around in the New Testament, right? But,
and you think Jesus is coming. This is a kind of a shade of Jesus Christ, but part of Jesus's whole thing was he needed to experience life as a mortal in order to overcome all of those things that life throws at you. And this mission is completely different. He's going to face, sin in this case isn't just some abstract way that people act. Sin is embodied in this guy, and he has to defeat this guy, right?
It's both.
That's why he's
too,
there.
right? Because he is curing the people of their sins also.
Yes,
when he strikes them
forcing
down,
them to face the consequences of it, and
So he's driving out the sin and also driving out actual demons, representations of evil. And you're right, encompassed within Canis there.
Right.
Encompassed within Canis. It's a tough one.
I am Telu, Lord above all. I've come to free you from demons and the wickedness of your own hearts. So he announces what he's doing there, and he does it.
Yeah.
So
But it is so if you go back to the origin, if he created the world, supposedly, I guess he created it. Well, this stuff all gets pretty weird pretty quick. But he created the world with people in it, right? And also apparently with demons in it. Or there's some opposing force that is his equal on the other side of it. Who knows?
Exactly.
Who knows, right? But he created a world that allowed for demons if he's all powerful. And then the demons just kind of took over, and he's like, I gotta go fix this. Dang it, my science experiment got out of control. Let me go down there with a magic hammer and fix this.
Right.
It's almost like a troubleshooting exercise for his little plaything, right?
It really is. Okay, I'll try this. I'll go and fix it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get the hammer thing, you get Thor and some of this Norse stuff. Could he have... This is weird. Just the whole thing of making Incanus suffer and everything is also super strange to me. He said when Incanus was suffering that the sound was like sweet music to Telu. The sound of his suffering was like sweet music, like he's rejoicing in this punishment.
Yeah. Which is, yeah, you're right. That's not
and that
the gods we're familiar with. That doesn't add up. Yeah.
That feels very sinister. It's like you're going beyond the idea of having consequence for sin, which is something that I subscribe to. It's what helps you decide to be good is when there's consequences for things that you do bad. But it feels like he's reveling in it a little bit.
Yeah.
And
it makes me wonder, I mean, these are humans telling these stories, right, through the years. And it makes me wonder if the human component, of humans do delight in their enemies' suffering sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Humans are capable of dealing with punishing people instead of delivering them from their wickedness without punishment. Humans kind of can revel in these somewhat dark good things, right? I defeated a demon. That's good. Yeah, but you did it in a really dark way. We're reading these new Jedi Academy books, right? For Aaron's lovely podcast, and they talk a lot about that's of the dark side. Yeah, but it's a good thing. It's going to help us with the enemy. It's of the dark side. You can't do that for that reason.
Yeah, you're towing an interesting line. Yeah,
right. And so I wonder if where I guess I'm going is like Telu behaving this way is weird to you. Maybe he didn't behave that way. It's just the way humans have adapted the story.
Which is 100% what could have happened. Yep.
And one of the big problems I have with organized religions of all kinds, because it all takes human interpretation to get it from A to Z, right? And so, that's always it's been a stumbling block for me for sure. But I wonder if this isn't how it went down. This is just the way Trappist knows the story.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. So that's what's always in the back of your mind as you're reading this is, yeah, was it though?
Did he do it?
Did he really leave him tied up to that wheel and just made him suffer through it all? Because if his whole point was just to eradicate evil, why even make the guy suffer? Just kill him. It said even demons can die from fire or iron. Okay,
well, he wanted to give him one more. He wanted to give him one more chance, but after that chance, and he says no. Then you're right. He still delights in like you didn't have to throw him in the pit and do all that, right?
Tie him to this wheel and everything. I feel like he could have ended it faster than he did.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's a human telling the story, but it seems like he's killed demons before without all this pageantry, right? But the people now have taken this story, I assume, of Incanus, and this is where they get all these details from about iron, about digging the pit. Remember we heard that in the opening chapters where the simple people the Scrael, where they're like, and he says something like they did all the right things for all the wrong reasons, right? It's like stories like this taught him to do it the right way, even though it's not the right reason, right?
Yeah.
And maybe, I mean, this story is where that iron thing comes from, the digging the pit and the different trees that you have to cut down and
yeah, you get very dogmatic and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think this story, we're questioning a lot of this stuff, and I think maybe we're meant to. I think Rothfuss is trying to emphasize some of those things that we see in organized religion. With some of the traditions that are born out of just history and humanity.
It's funny because by playing so closely at most of the places to stories that we kind of already know, right? By playing so close to that line, when he steps away from them, it is somewhat jarring. Yeah. Right. Like these things that you're bringing up about the punishment and the
right. Yep.
But I wonder if other cultures don't have that same reaction, that are less tied to the Jesus story and
right. Absolutely.
Traditional Christian stories.
I fully acknowledge that there could be connections to other religions that I'm completely missing.
Sure. Yeah. It might be culturally, it might be interesting to understand how different cultures experience this, differently than we do.
Totally.
I think the Wheel of Judgment is a really cool idea. I really like it. I after I read this book the first time, I was running a D&D campaign, and did you guys know you listen to a D&D podcast? And I actually Pat actually guested on Critical Role, the D&D show that I watch a lot, and played a character for several episodes. Did a fantastic job. It was amazing. It was like his words written on the pages dripping from his mouth in live form in these sessions. It was beautiful, something to behold in real time. But I made a character because my world was set in the same world as them. I made a character based on his character, and I made him a smithy, and his shop was called the Iron Wheel.
Hey,
yeah,
the Iron Wheel.
And then the party that was working in his town decided to go off on an adventure that I didn't want them to go on, and so I didn't really even get to play with him at all.
Dang it!
Which is how D&D works. It's like, oh, I set this whole thing up, and they're like, look at this weird horse, and then they just follow the horse for 3 days.
Sounds so frustrating.
Come on, guys, the wheel. He's going to make you a magic box that you can. Oh, come on.
Son of a.
D&D's great.
D&D's great. But in the end, Telu sacrificed himself to eradicate the greatest evil left in the world. So, with the understanding that he'd come back.
if summoned in the right ways, which again is, like we saw in the Midwinter pageant, if you say the right words, even like his essence, I guess, can scare the demons away, right? Even if he doesn't come back himself.
Right.
Does Menda sound a little bit to you like an exaggerated Kvothe? My head started going to some interesting places with this.
I hadn't thought of that.
Maybe we'll come back. I don't remember whether I wrote it down for Debbie After Dark or not.
I like the idea of it. I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, it's not fully fleshed. Maybe I should spend some more time with it. What I mean is he just does everything quickly and well. He walks quickly. He does all these things faster than everyone would expect. Both not to that degree, but similar idea, right? That he's just he does everything quicker and faster than everyone, and
right
seems perfect in some ways.
Just kind of 2 steps ahead of everybody. Yeah. I like it. Well, that's that.
Incarnus does not sound like the kind of person that would be saving a kid from the snow and giving him a silver talent. Not from this story.
Nope. So Garrick, in that regard, you're not a very good Incarnus.
No. More actor training.
Be more sinister.
You got more for this one?
I do love that Rothfuss waits until the chapter after to teach us about the origin of Incarnus. I thought that was a cool way of just organizing his storytelling, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I wonder if he ever had it reversed. Because Rothfuss he's a tinkerer, right? Like he's playing with his stuff a lot before he really nails it down. That's one of the reasons we don't have the 3rd book. But yeah, it definitely does something different. Like, the point I made about Incarnus, a demon, being the one to help him, and what does that say maybe about the religion, and is it ironic, or is it commentary, or what is it? If we got this story first, we might have thought differently about that.
Yep. Yeah. It's impactful. Just a lighter note. Did Kvothe get a little wine drunk before this? It talks about him feeling wonderful warmth, a strange, dizzy, and fuddled. Is that a combination of his concussion and drinking wine, which he's probably not used to drinking?
It could be.
It just made me chuckle a little bit.
I marked it down to just him, the fever, but it could be.
Combination of a lot of things going on for that poor kid.
Yes.
On that note, I got nothing else.
Shadows themselves?
Shadows themselves. Oh, man. This one was tough for me. Life was still hard for Kvothe, but he was growing as hardy and calloused as the soles of his feet. He'd learned how to beg even more effectively, and also added cut purse, pickpocket, and lockbreaker to his retinue of skills. Now he'd also learned to neither trust nor expect help from anyone, for the night is dark and full of predators. One night, Kvothe was awoken in his loft by the sound of pursuit in the alley below. It was several older boys chasing a younger boy of perhaps 8 years. Quickly catching him, Kvothe saw the boy's bare skin shining pale in the moonlight as the older boys held him down, and the boy, it says, could only sob. Kvothe found himself with a heavy roof tile in his hand, ready to throw down at the attackers, ready to help. He says he'd been pursued in a situation like this before and had indeed been caught. But then he pauses, looking back at his secret lair. He had a blanket, a loaf of bread, even some savings, a rainy day fund, not to mention Ben's book. He was safe here. It was his. That would all go away the minute he threw that brick and the boys tracked where it came from. So Kvothe set the brick down, went back to his blanket, clenched his teeth, and tried to tune out the sounds of coarse laughter and hopeless sobbing below. It was a tough chapter, man.
Are they just beating the boy, or is there something else going on here?
Trigger warning if you need to skip ahead 5 minutes, Khalasar, sexual assault. I think the boy's being sexually assaulted. Absolutely.
And therefore also Kvothe had been.
Right. I think so. Yeah.
It's not something I picked up the first 2 times I read this book.
It took me the first time I read the book, so a few years ago. I don't remember picking it up, but this time reading it, I think it was the first read through I did for this podcast. I went, whoa. And then I went back and went, okay, yeah, pretty sure that's what's happening. Just the fact that the sobbing, the skin says a lot in the skin. Mm-hmm.
Well, and the fact that he's told us lots of times about how he's been chased and beaten up down an alley. We've already heard 2 of them, right? And now he said, that happened to me a few months ago.
Right. And I think the regret that he talks about in the next chapter, which we'll get to.
That's part of it too.
Yeah. That emphasizes it even a little more. Yeah. And it's even sad coming off of these chapters where he had all these people willing to help him, even in Canis, facing some dire circumstances himself, according to Holly anyways. Yet he himself wasn't willing to help someone else who really could have used it. Right.
Yeah. Especially, but having gone through it himself. I know that facing your trauma is not always something you can really do. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some people freeze up. I mean, I guess what he's describing here doesn't seem like freezing up. It seems like a choice.
It's very
a proactive choice.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems silly to point out, but this is the point where Rothfuss makes the other small reference to something that's got a much bigger part of the story later. The sweet eaters, that are addicted to denner resin. And he says they will kill you for a pair of pennies.
Right.
Because they're so addicted and need their fix.
I'm firmly entrenched in the season of Better Call Saul that just came out on Netflix. Finally, I held off watching it until it made it to Netflix.
Yeah.
So, feels very methy.
I didn't watch Better Call Saul, but
which really isn't a central part of Better Call Saul like it is Breaking Bad. But
yeah,
I think now it's all out, Scad. It's all done. Like this was the final season. I think you'd really appreciate Better Call Saul.
Eowyn loved it. It just was one of those things. I don't know. I was busy with, stuff when she started watching it, and then I was behind and didn't want to wait, and just never did. I saw bits and pieces over time as happens, right? And everything I watched I thought was really well done, but
it's so good.
Welcome to the Better Call Saul podcast.
Paul Goodman. What?
Have I made the joke too many times? Do you have anything else about shadows themselves you want to hit on?
Yeah, just little observations. By the third year, his feet were like old leather. I could run barefoot for hours over the rough stones of the city and not feel it at all. Yet, in the previous chapter, it was his foot being cut that really hobbled him, right? That led to his beating. So I think that's just symbolic of the hardening of, he's becoming a more hardy individual overall, even to the point that he's able to not do something that, is very difficult for him to not do. He's just a natural at everything. He's like, I just learned how to become a cut person, a pickpocket, and a lock breaker. I just learned how to do it,
His mom was marveling over how good his hands were.
Yep.
In the previous episode. So
yeah, the quote is, my nimble fingers were put to a use my parents or Ben never would have guessed. Indeed. Mm-hmm. Okay.
I hope he gets to use them in other ways that they never would have guessed in the future. Now I went dirty. Sorry.
Maybe he does already.
All right. Chapter 25, Interlude, Eager for Reasons. Kvothe has chronicler pause and explains that this latest story of the boy in the alley is as close as they will find for the reason Kvothe became the Kvothe from the stories. He remembers clear as a bell that moment that he chose to let that boy suffer in the alley while he clinged to his existence where the three roofs meet. While Kvothe couldn't have done much, he chose not to do anything, and that regret has stayed with him forever. Bast presses Kvothe on why he stayed in such a terrible city all that time, in such a terrible situation. Well, Kvothe agrees that in hindsight, quite literally anywhere would have been better. At the time, he didn't feel like there was anywhere for him to go. Everyone he knew was dead, or in Benthe's case, hundreds of miles away in a direction he barely understood, with no maps. And beyond that, he was still broken inside from the loss of his parents. He couldn't fathom seeing Benthe again in any case. His brain was still in shock, and some part of him felt that the trials of Tarbean were maybe just punishment for him not dying when he should have, and his family did. None of it makes sense now, of course, but it did at the time. His brain had to be woken up, stirred into action. He needed a reason to leave and to be reminded of the things that he'd forgotten. And Chronicler's colleague Scarpy is just the man to do it. And that's the end of the chapter.
Yep. The end of the chapters we'll be covering for this episode. So I like that. That's a good ending.
It's been kind of fun to find good spots, right? I try to keep it around 40 pages, but it's not always exactly 40 for a good stopping point. So
this is a great stopping point.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, bones mend, he says, but regret stays with you forever.
That's right.
Yeah. And he says, I remember that young boy sobbing in the dark, clear as a bell after all these years. And I thought that clear as a bell simile was poignant. It's, remember when in the last chapters, when Incanus would lie while strapped to the iron wheel, it would ring out like a bell. Almost, right?
Yeah.
Signifying his guilt.
His guilt, or even sin maybe of not helping, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this is clear as a bell. He remembers that boy.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah. That's a good call. I don't have much on this chapter. I think it's an interesting, for all the things that he goes through, it's interesting, that he would note this is the moment that turned Kvothe into the Kvothe in the stories. And I guess maybe the only thing I'll add is I think the Kvothe we're going to get in the stories is mean, a man of action, a man of
action,
a man of no limits to what he'll do to get done what he needs to get done.
Yeah.
And a man that wants to avoid regret regardless, and he'll do almost anything to avoid it. Right?
Yep, that's what I took from it too. Not want to feel regret again.
Yeah.
That awful feeling. But, yep. I love just some of the stuff I just vibed with big time in this little chapter where he says, I'm not saying it's rational. Emotions by their very nature are not reasonable things. I don't feel that way now, but back then I did, and I remember. Yep. I love that, right? That's the media that I love to consume, is the stuff that doesn't make sense. You and I have talked about it and said, like, that doesn't make sense. Well, it's not supposed to make sense because they're humans making the choices, right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Flawed decision making based on emotions and being human that's what makes stories good.
Right. I love it.
And that's one of the things I think, without spoiling, that's one of the things that I really like about this series. I've heard people detract from this series, by saying Kvothe is so perfect. I've even done it a little. Kvothe is so perfect. How can you enjoy reading this guy that has so few flaws? It's like, well, he does have some, and they're big. They're big flaws that bite him in the ass a lot, and he doesn't learn from them.
Right.
And like, he just keeps doing them. And
he hung a sword from the freaking inn.
Pride is one of them, right? And I don't know. I find it. I find him very relatable in his totally unrelatableness.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
He's this paragon of humanity, and yet he still suffers from like the worst of the worst character traits you can have. Right.
Yep. And then he kind of gives you hope in the sense that he soldiers on and still does a lot of good and keeps at it. So I really vibed with that idea. And I know you do too. And this one is for us as well, Scad, because I know you're the same way. We're all creatures of habit. It's far too easy to stay in the familiar ruts we dig for ourselves.
Yeah, that hurts.
Here we are, 142 episodes later.
Yeah.
In the familiar ruts.
Yep. This is one of the ruts I enjoy.
Yep, absolutely. I don't want to get out of this rut.
I don't enjoy all.
Probably other ones I should, but yeah.
Maybe I should stop watching Are You the One? That's a rut I
Is that your rut?
Away from.
Is that your rut?
Oh, I like those trashy, terrible dating shows with all the hot people running around.
Mm-hmm. You and Padme. Padme. But hey, I sit and watch some of Disney's Star Wars offerings, so I don't know that mine's much better.
I haven't seen the finale yet.
I haven't either. Nope.
Shall we move on to Debbie After Dark?
I'm ready.
Is it time?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. So if you're not interested in being spoiled, stop now. Join us in a month for our next episode, which will cover, vaguely 40 pages. I've got it laid out somewhere. But come join us then. If you want to stick around for all the spoilery fun, do so after, and we'll start after this little jingle.
Debbie After Dark. Where do you want to start with this one? We were talking before of how we don't have a ton of Debbie content in this one. We covered it in an episode that's looking like one of our longer Kingkiller episodes so far, so which is great.
Yeah, this is my document with the least amount of notes that I have.
Mm-hmm.
This is an 8-page document for me. I usually go around 10.
Whoa.
My notes and everything. Well, let's start with your what ifs.
Yeah. So what if he'd gone with Jake and Seth?
Yeah. And I think your two what ifs are kind of have similar answers, right?
Sure, I do too.
I think if he had made either one of the other choice that Matt asked about what if about is what if he had gone inside the inn, the inn of the Laughing Man. Laughing Man? Laughing Man.
Mm-hmm.
I get it confused with the Kneeling Man.
Yeah, of course.
And I think what you think might happen is maybe not where it would go. So he would maybe have to start dealing with people again, and some of those doors might start opening, right? And he might start to have to talk a little bit about his family or whatever. But he also would just kind of adopt a new life and replace the old one and just bury it for good and move past it.
Sure.
And so I wonder if it would have been something where this awakening that he's talking about at the end of this last chapter here, where his brain gets woken up, maybe never happens.
Never happens. Mm-hmm.
He just tells them the cursory bits of the story, buries it again, and builds a new life with these other people.
Right.
And that would be, it's hard to call it tragic. Like, it'd probably be a happier life for him, to be honest. Right? But then we wouldn't have the Kingkiller Chronicle, so I don't know.
Then we wouldn't have the Chronicle.
What do you think?
I'm in the same boat as you. He goes with Seth and Jake, lives a quiet, comfortable life where they sing songs and eat buttered bread and they love
squash.
each other and squash. They probably don't eat a lot of squash. They're probably so freaking sick of squash.
It's true.
From the looks of it, he will be very loved and very cared for. But you mentioned tragic. There's a bit of tragedy in that, just knowing, as Ben says, this kid's going to change the world. This kid has
Lost
the ability to
opportunity.
change the world. And you have to wonder if he gets, I hate to say mired down, because it would probably be a pretty idyllic, just good life, salt of the earth people. Just you're busy every single day, getting up at 5 a.m. to work the farm, and you're working hard and you go to bed tired every night. It's not a bad life to live. But for someone with the potential Kvothe has, is there some tragedy in that? Maybe. And so you wonder what would be missed. On the other hand, maybe some of that stuff comes back out again, and he wants to leave and join the Imperial Academy, like his Uncle Owen had promised him he could.
That's right.
Next summer. I need you, Luke. Harvest is when I need you the most. But maybe he does end up being able to leave and go to the Academy. I don't know. But
it's just another season.
Mm-hmm.
This sense of, is it a tragedy if people don't get to share their gifts? Or are people, do you have a responsibility to share your gifts if you're good at things, right? In high school, I remember,
reach that peak that you have the potential to reach.
Right.
Yeah.
Or can you just watch TV like I do? I remember in high school, I had two, again, they weren't friends. I'm starting to think I didn't have any friends. They weren't friends. They were acquaintances.
You knew a lot of
friendly, people. John Lee and Chris Tong. One of them was a fantastic pianist, John, and the other one was a fantastic violinist. And they would talk about, whether they were driven by needing, they had this gift and they needed to share it, or they had to, or they just enjoyed doing it, and if they could stop, or is there kind of a sense that they should share this with people because they're so good, right? And we're high school kids. Maybe they aren't as good as I thought they were at the time, but at the time they seemed amazing. And I remember them debating it for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I feel like Kvothe he's the kind of person, maybe at some point he says he needed something to wake him up, but he'd have stumbled on something at some point. He's too special, right? Maybe.
You know what's interesting? It just hit me. The life that I just described is, minus the love and affection of a family, is kind of the life he's living right now at the current point of the story, right? In the inn, he's got just a very set of tasks that he does every day running the inn, and lives a very quiet life, burying his talent a little bit. Now that is born a little more out of need. It sounds like he's hiding.
Maybe he's already done. Maybe he's done some of the things that he owed the world to do.
That he owed the world. But yeah, you're right. That idea of, do we owe the world our, sharing that, even if it means that we have to suffer to get there, or can we empower ourselves to just live a quiet life if we want to?
Yeah.
I think there's maybe some value in that too.
So sometimes, Matt, you say these things and they just strike me. And I don't know why this one did, but it's just I take all this stuff way too seriously. like maybe if I just relaxed and had a good time, and wasn't so uptight all the time, this would just like it's okay to just live a life like that,
right?
And not be angry and like anxious all the time. I could probably. Can I do that?
Can you just do that tomorrow? Starting tomorrow? Can you just do that?
I don't know, man. I'll try. I imagine the second I start working, I'll be like, I'll grumble about something.
Yeah, that's gone. Living the Jerry Gergich life, remember, from Parks and Rec?
The Gergich life, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the dream.
Mm-hmm. Puts in his 40 years or whatever at the parks department, and where he gets to come home at 5 o'clock every night and be with his family and go on vacations in the summer. And Yep. But Jerry Gergich is no Kvothe.
No.
Yeah. But then, going to those, and then maybe he goes into the Laughing Man. You got to think, man, picking up that lute again. How healing could that have been? He heard a lute playing in the Laughing Man, and maybe he goes in and rests for a little bit, gets a little more comfortable, and then maybe one night he's like, "Can I try?" And then just and just people are crying. It's all Rhaegar Targaryen in there, like
we're about to see him do that very thing. Not in an inn, but in a setting where he can't help himself but play.
Mm-hmm.
And he embarrasses the hell out of somebody whose lute it was. And you got to think like he could have easily just, like you said, he could have just turned into the best inn performer in Tarbean.
Yeah.
Right. And that's his job now. He just plays shows and hires a bodyguard so he doesn't get killed every time he goes around the corner.
Or he ends up working at the Laughing Man Inn, just like he's working in now with Bass, and
sure
gets a job, works his way up to the top, with that sharp mind of his. Pretty soon the Laughing Man's the most happening place in all of Tarbean, It's interesting.
It is interesting.
And all of it would have started with just accepting human kindness. Right?
Yeah.
Is there a lesson there for us to learn? I know I'm not often good at accepting kindness.
I'm not great either. It's a thought I have often, to be honest, in this series. Is like, you're so talented, get out of your own way and just spend a few months making money playing the lute, because you can totally do it. Just stop the school stuff. Stop, we're moving way forward in the story here, but like just get ahead in life a little bit and then do what you want, because you can do this.
Set yourself up.
Get out of your own way. But you're only 15. I forgot you don't know any of this stuff.
Not old grizzled curmudgeons like us.
Anyways. I never said grizzled. Where do you want to go? Got a few things.
We did our what ifs. So what do you got? What else you got?
Nothing can hurt us after we are dead, or so we have been told. And just the way he says that line makes me wonder if Kvothe actually does die as part of this whole saga and comes back, ever more hurt. There's nothing can hurt us after we're dead, right?
Right.
I don't have anything really behind it at the moment, but like, you know what I mean?
We haven't talked much about that fourth door.
No, we haven't. Fourth door is there.
I do think he's got some serious head trauma. It's the last time I'll mention it, but
I bet it is not the last time you mention it. It's going to be an ongoing theme.
I'm going to be paying attention to every time something comes close to that young man's head. Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah. You mentioned how interesting the idea of a knot is. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the quote. So the quote is, knots are interesting things. There's something potentially tied to the lockless box, which I think we've talked about before. The lockless box shows up in book 2. It's a box with no, kind of like the box in his own
room,
a much smaller version, but like the box in his room. It's got no visible lid to open, right? It doesn't, no one knows how to get it open. But there's something on it that Kvothe identifies that actually the owners of the box have had it for generations. They didn't notice it before, but Kvothe notices it. and it's called a story knot, which is a Yiddish language, Yiddish way of telling the story. And I wondered, and it's it's a bit throwaway. I don't have much on it, but I wondered if the line that Ben gives him in the dream is, the knot could be the strongest or the weakest part of the rope, right? Well, the story knot, if it's like a riddle or a clue as to how to open the box, that can be the strongest part of the lock of the box if you don't know the story knot or don't know how to read it or don't know its secret. But if you know that story, then it's the weakest part of the lock, right? And the way it goes is that, I think we talked about this in the last episode, maybe, or the one before. The way the theory goes is that Kvothe's mother is actually the Lackless that ran away, and is high nobility, basically, and that if she was, then he's the blood of that family and may have some of the secret to open that. If he kind of figure it out, the blood, maybe it talks about, one of the riddles talks about the blood or something. So
Right.
Anyway, just tying that knot thing that doesn't exist and that didn't happen in his story, but maybe it's some sort of premonition type thing for his future with this Lackless box. It's a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, you got to think that that's going to come up again, though. No question.
The
fact
knots?
that it would come up in this dream, and then he makes a point of saying, Ben never talked to me about knots. Yeah, they're coming back. So.
Feels like it. Feels like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to talk about angels?
Angels is an interesting idea. Yeah.
Talk
a lot about demons. Let's talk about some angels.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I'm not sure I'm not kind of in the theme of what we talked about earlier with this religion and how maybe it's a little mixed up. I'm not sure how different they are, right? At least in their sense of this story. Death in the form of a great bird with wings of fire and shadow. It hovered above, watching patiently for me. I slept, and the great bird settled its burning wings around me. I imagined a delicious warmth. Then its claws were in me, tearing me open. So that's right before he's about to die, right before Incanus rolls him over in the snow. In the next, actually, I think it's 2 chapters away from where we stopped, we get this. The last time he touched them, this is Aleph, which is a version of Telu. The last time he touched them, there was pain, and wings tore from their backs that they might go where they wished. Wings of fire and shadow. Same lines there. Wings of fire and shadow. Wings of iron and glass, wings of stone and blood. And this is that text is taken from a part of a story where we're hearing about essentially the creation of angels. And so I guess this is just evidence maybe that what he's seeing is an angel, right? The angel of death, perhaps. But also how interesting that its claws were in me, tearing me open. That's not a good
Pleasant
image.
feeling.
Well, not, and it's not you tell me, Matt, but it's not usually what I get from the experience you would have with an angel, right? And then he's saved by Incanus. And so I think he's definitely playing a lot with this angels versus demons thing and how far apart maybe are they, right?
Right. Yeah.
We'll get a lot more in the next book when they start telling us the story about Lanray and stuff. But it feels like he's trying to make that line muddier than we normally think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Muddier or even mislabeled completely.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
Yeah. You think we'll see Holly and Garrick again?
I hope so.
It would be so cool to see Garrick just come back at some point.
I don't like I use this argument maybe more than I should, but like, why give us their names? It could have just been Incanus and the mask with the demon smile or something. Like, he gave us their names. We didn't get the guard's name that beat him
Right.
up.
Mhm.
We didn't get the girls who gave him the stuff's name, right? We got their names. And usually that means something at some point. So yeah, I'm wondering if they'll come back. Maybe they'll be tied to some of this religion stuff. I kind of feel like there's maybe like this little subgroup of people running around this world that are trying to work to keep the real story of the religion alive and not the stories that everyone tells, like Trappist,
Oh,
right? And not the
maybe.
stories that everyone knows. Kind of similar to the Chandrian and how they're trying to remove their stories. These people are running around trying to keep these stories
There's like
alive.
an underground resistance
and
to that.
Garrick and Holly might be two of them, and Scarpy, who we're about to meet as well, and maybe even the Chronicler, right? Trying to keep these stories real and alive. And I wonder that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Love it. I don't have too much more
No,
in this paltry Devi After Dark segment.
I mean, it turned out a little better than I thought.
I've enjoyed it. I have enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've got some other stuff here, but it can keep. These are things that are
Think
going to
so?
come back. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Certainly got the stone archway in his dream,
Mm-hmm.
reaching through it, and he wakes up.
That stone archway will come back for sure later in this book.
Yep. We'll always be wondering about Trapeze's background, where he's come from.
Yes. Yeah. The theory is that he's a Tellan priest. I kind of said that maybe earlier. A Tellan priest that either lost his way or got kicked out, or maybe realized the stories weren't all that they cracked up to be. I don't know.
Yeah, Rothfuss. I found this. I won't call it research because I don't figure this is research. This is just looking stuff up on the internet.
It counts.
Research feels a little more labor intensive to me. He explained in an interview with Tor, the famous publication, that Trapeze is actually a disciple of a schism of Talanism, referred to as the Mender heresies.
The Mender heresies.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Right.
Because
Mender comes up later, right?
Well, Menda
There's
is
Menda.
the name.
Isn't there? Yeah. Mender.
I don't know. But
so maybe he's someone that got booted.
As part of the schism.
Yeah.
But he's still got people on the inside feeding him bread. Maybe.
Getting bread from someone.
Interesting.
Yep. But not any more information
cool.
other than that.
Where did you find that? Was it like an interview?
It was yeah. So I first found it on, I was just like reading some Reddit thing or something, and they said it on there, and then I found it's on the wiki actually, for under Trapeze's
cool
article, but it doesn't give a lot, but it does give a footnote to a blog. I haven't even gone to the blog to look at it. It's on Tor.com. Rothfuss reread. Pat answers admissions questions. That would probably be.
I'm gonna go
interesting to read. I'll send it to you. Yeah,
it's interesting starting this coverage for this book, right? Because I feel like we're pretty spoiled with the Song of Ice and Fire content that's out there.
Yeah,
it's really easy to find. There's a billion people talking about it, and I don't know. It just feels easier. And we don't know the haunts. We don't know where to go look. We go to the wiki,
and the wiki
just do the Google search.
Is not even.
The wiki's good, but it's not
close to what we have for a Song of Ice and Fire.
No. Yeah. Anyway, good episode, Matt.
Great episode.
I really had fun talking to you.
Right back at you.
Good.
Right back at you. Shall we sign off and close this thing down?
Let's do it.
All right. My sign off's really simple. So good night. Love you, Khalasar. And maybe take Scad's advice and get out of your own way a little bit.
And don't be so angry.
Well, you could be angry, but get out of your way.
I liked this from Incanis in the story within the story within the story. I would only change how fast I ran.
Do it.
I don't know. I don't think it's good advice, but if you're gonna run, I guess run fast.
Yep, go for
Yes.
it. Maybe that's what kind of Kvothe becomes later. Maybe he kind of adopts that. And that's kind of wild to think about. Good
It
one.
is.
Nice pull. Glad you said that.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Matt. A lot of fun. Thanks,
Good
guys, for
night.
listening.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.